how you would die on every planet. This is you on Mercury. This is you on Saturn. And this is you in Uranus. What's the commonality between all of these versions of you? Well, they're all dead. And that's because basically every planet in our solar system is uninhabitable. But today, we're gonna explain exactly how you got to all of these planets and what about these planets caused you such a harsh and painful death. And to do that, let's take a couple steps back. Before you died on any of these planets, you are the bravest astronaut this side of the Mississippi. And NASA has decided that now is the time that we embark on interplanetary travel. Luckily for you, NASA has developed a special technology that has granted you the perfect number of respawns to die on every planet and still come back in one piece. Because after all, they know that you're just a squishy little guy, and these planets are pretty crazy. But without further ado, let's get to our first planet and experience just exactly how it would kill you. You're now officially approaching the very first planet in the entire solar system, Mercury. Instantly, you're met with two options. Do you land on the light side, or do you land on the dark side? And although you're equipped with limited respawns, you understand that you have some wiggle room, and you decide to first land on the light side. One of the first things you notice as you descend closer and closer to the surface of Mercury is that you're experiencing very little atmospheric drag. And that's because there's actually no atmosphere on Mercury. Mercury only has a thin exosphere. When your rocket ship descends onto Earth, you notice the atmospheric drag and you feel the resistance. You can see the flames out of the window on the side of the ship. And that's because Earth has a strong atmosphere, but Mercury has no such thing, which already brings us to our first probable cause of death, which is a hard impact. Your spaceship isn't equipped for such a thin atmosphere, and for that reason, your landing is extra harsh. Although, miraculously, you and your ship survive. And you're now on the surface of Mercury. And before you even step out of your ship, you notice that the surface is bumpy and mountainous, and that's due to this lack of atmosphere. Just like how your ship experienced no atmospheric drag, meteorites don't either, meaning that they don't burn up when they enter the planet's exosphere. They keep going until they impact the ground hard, making the surface of Mercury look like an abandoned war zone. Regardless, you press the button, open the door, and you step foot onto the surface of Mercury. And within seconds, the spacesuit that your life depends on fails and begins to melt. The pressure that your spacesuit maintains to keep oxygen in the suit is gone due to burn holes that have appeared throughout the suit. And now you and your spacesuit are melting on the surface of Mercury, and before you're even able to gasp for air, your skin is boiling, your organs are shutting down, and you are dead before you can even asphyxiate from the lack of oxygen. That was probably quicker than you thought, but that's just the harsh reality of the light side of Mercury. Because Mercury has no atmosphere and a very thin exosphere, you are directly exposed to the harsh sun in full effect. And what that looks like, at least for the warm side of the planet, is temperatures approaching 427 degrees Celsius, which, like I mentioned, is enough to essentially cook you in seconds. But it doesn't just stop there, because not only does the lack of atmosphere not protect you from the sun's heat and radiation, but the lack of atmospheric pressure also means that the boiling point of water is significantly lower, which means that not only would all of your organs fail due to the sheer heat your body is experiencing, but also all of your bodily fluids would almost instantly evaporate. So yeah, the light side of Mercury is nothing to mess with, and the sheer unprotected exposure to the sun would kill, vaporize, and melt you in a matter of seconds. And even if it didn't, even if you were the most heat-resistant person in the world, there's also no oxygen, which kind of just seems like a cliff note at this point, but it is true, there's still no oxygen, even if you could survive this heat. You've respawned safely in your spaceship, and you've decided that you're just gonna wait for night to come to you. And you wait 1 hour, 8 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. And at this point, you're curious if night's ever going to come. And the reality is, it likely won't come for a long time. And that's because Mercury rotates extremely slow, meaning that 1 day on Mercury is actually 176 days on Earth. So instead of waiting a half year for nighttime to come, you decide to fly your ship to the dark side of Mercury to see if that's any more inhabitable. Your ship lands and it's dark, although the lights on your ship and the distant glimmer of stars is enough to illuminate the surface of the planet for you to kind of walk around. You press the button, open the ship door, and take your first steps onto the surface of Mercury during nighttime. Instantly, you're relieved that you're not melting or having your blood boil, but you're now realizing what you are dealing with: a severe lack of heat. The nighttime temperatures on Mercury can get as low as negative 180 degrees Celsius, which may seem strange because this planet is the closest to the sun, but due to the lack of atmosphere, Mercury is very poorly insulated and not able to maintain and spread this heat across the planet, leaving you with almost only two extremes. After spending a few seconds on the surface, you realize that your spacesuit is once again not equipped for the sheer lack of heat, and you notice the cold to begin to penetrate your suit and cause severe internal damage. damage. Your visor is instantly fogged up from your breath. Your nose, fingers, and toes are instantly turned numb and turning black with frostbite. At a molecular level, ice crystals are forming inside of your cells, causing internal damage, and your body is beginning to shut down. You can try to move around all you want to try to generate more body heat, but it's simply not going to work. And even if your spacesuit is able to maintain pressure and give you oxygen, within a few minutes, hypothermia will set in and you will be dead. You once again respawn in your ship and realize that there is a third option for landing, a potential Goldilocks zone. You notice that the daytime is too harsh and the nighttime is too harsh. However, there is a strip in the middle of the planet where night meets day, and you decide to land there. Scientifically, and this is real, this area is known as the Terminator Zone, and it's the most moderate place on the entire planet, which is kind of ironic. Regardless, you fly to the Terminator Zone, you land, and you step out of the ship. The part of the Terminator Zone that you find yourself in is on the warm side, not the cold side. You're experiencing more of the sun exposure. However, it's not nearly to the same degree that you experienced on the daytime side, although this moderate temperature still far exceeds the temperature that your NASA spacesuit is able to tolerate. And I guess that this is a good time to mention, because in this hypothetical, we're using NASA's most current flagship spacesuit, which is rated to tolerate temperatures up to 121 degrees Celsius and as cold as negative 157 degrees Celsius, meaning that the suit definitely gives you a huge advantage over being, well, naked, but it's simply no match for the harsh conditions of Mercury. And for that reason, you once again find yourself dead within minutes. Leaving Mercury with your captain's logs full, you now make your way to the next planet in the solar system, Venus. Not to be confused with Penis. I don't know what happened there, but yeah, we're heading to Venus. Your ship is now orbiting Venus, and you begin your descent into this mysterious red-looking planet. As you descend closer to the surface of this planet, you can't help but notice the sheer opposites that you have just experienced. As you're descending closer to the surface of Venus, you are seeing clouds almost everywhere. Thick clouds at that. It's almost like a dark fog, and the closer you get to the surface of Venus, the darker things have become, which in contrast to Mercury is total night and day, because Mercury had no atmosphere, meaning no clouds, no air resistance, nothing. Venus, on the other hand, has an abundance of air pressure, meaning that your landing is relatively easy and light. But the pleasantries of Venus are about to end. Your ship gently lands on the surface and almost instantly begins to make creaking noises. These are noises you haven't yet heard from your ship, but you continue on. You press the button, open the bay door, and step onto the surface of Venus, where you're met with familiar and extremely unfamiliar problems. The first familiar problem is the extreme heat. The surface of Venus is actually hotter than the surface of Mercury, reaching temperatures of 464 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough to melt lead. And because of this, like on Mercury, the integrity of your suit is compromised, you have lost all air, your skin is melting, your liquids are evaporating, and you are dead within seconds. But let's just say, hypothetically, if your suit was able to handle this amount of heat, well, you wouldn't last much longer at all. And that's because Venus has a very unique atmosphere. Atmospheric pressure is sometimes calculated in bar. And for example, on Earth at sea level, the atmospheric pressure is 1 bar. If you've ever seen a watch that's waterproof, it might say 5 bar or something along those lines, and that just means it can tolerate higher pressure from being underwater. Well, the atmospheric pressure on Venus is 92 bar, meaning that its atmosphere is 92 times denser than Earth's. So even though Venus is a similar size to Earth and the gravity you would experience on this planet is relatively similar, because of the sheer atmospheric pressure, as soon as you step foot on this planet, your body would almost instantly collapse. This amount of atmospheric pressure is almost equivalent to being 1.6 kilometers under the ocean. But not only would movement be extremely hard and your body would even struggle to stand, but the sheer amount of pressure would also instantly rupture your eardrums and force all of the air out of your lungs. And if those things for some reason didn't kill you, the collapsing of all of your blood vessels definitely would. And as your dead body lays on the surface of Venus, it begins to rain. But this rain isn't any regular rain. This rain from the clouds that you saw is sulfuric acid, which at this point is basically just adding insult to injury. Because not only does your body essentially instantly vaporize, but it's also crushed and then melted by the acidic rain and fog that exists almost everywhere on this hellish planet. There's no Goldilocks zone or Terminator zone or good zone on Venus. It's all a thick fog of acid, extreme heat, extreme pressure, and it's extremely not fun. You respawn on your ship moments before the structural integrity of that collapses, and you begin your journey to your next planet, This planet looks familiar, but you just can't quite put your finger on it. You can see white, fluffy clouds from the atmosphere, huge, beautiful blue oceans, vast green landscapes, and vast brown deserts. You pick a random spot and decide to descend. The first place you decide to descend is an island just off the coast of India. You know that you're on Earth and realize that you likely don't even need your spacesuit, but you keep it on anyway. You press the button, open the door, and you walk onto this island off the coast of India. And instantly you realize that you're on North Sentinel Island. You try to turn around and get back to your ship, but you get an arrow through both of your knees, and before you can even say a prayer, you have been killed. And realize that maybe landing on North Sentinel Island wasn't the best place to land. You respawn in your ship, fly back up to orbit, and pick another location, this time on an island off the coast of Brazil, far away from India and any sort of uncontacted tribe, right? You land your ship, you open the door, and you step onto this island to realize that there's no people here at all. You can breathe. You take off your helmet and enjoy being home for once. Until you realize multiple snakes slithering up your legs, and you now have multiple venomous snakes in your spacesuit, and you're currently dying on Snake Island. You respawn in your ship, fly back up to orbit, and realize you're done. You're not going to any more uninhabited islands. You pick somewhere central in the United States and decide to land. You press the map, you open the door, and you realize that you've just landed in Gary, Indiana. You take your first few steps to admire the abandoned buildings. But before you know it, your spaceship is being stolen and sold for drugs, your space boots are being stolen off your feet, and you've just been stabbed for wearing a fancy-looking spacesuit. You lasted a noble 20 seconds. Obviously, I'm just being satirical here. There's more ways you could die on Earth than I could ever possibly mention. Although, if you did want to watch a couple videos about how you could die on Earth, there's a lot of videos on my channel that go into detail about that. You respawn in your spaceship, take a deep breath, and prepare for your next planet. You're approaching Mars, and already you're kind of scarred from red-looking planets, but you know that this planet is different, and you're excited to see how different this planet really is. You orbit the planet, and then begin your descent to the surface of Mars. Upon your descent, you're pleased to see that there is no sulfuric acid clouds or rain or gas anywhere, although you realize that's likely a result of the low atmospheric pressure that exists on Mars, and unfortunately, we now know the result of low atmospheric pressure. You have another harsh landing due to the lack of air resistance, and after the reddish dust settles from your impact, you open the door and take your first steps onto the surface of Mars. It's daytime, and you're pleasantly surprised because the temperature is extremely moderate. During the daytime, the temperature of Mars only gets to around 20 degrees Celsius, which is comfortable. Because of the distance that we now are from the sun, the temperature is not nearly as severe as it was on Mercury. However, there is still a big difference with the lack of atmosphere, and it's kind of twofold. The first issue is the radiation from the sun is still strong, 40 to 50 times stronger than it is on the Earth, which is concerning. And also, when nighttime comes and the heat from the sun is no longer available, the temperatures can get as cold as negative 153 degrees Celsius, which would kill you in a similar fashion as to what we explained before. But because we know how you would die on an extremely cold planet, and because you landed during the daytime on Mars, let's just discuss this situation. You're on the surface of Mars, the temperature is pleasant, and so far, things are looking good. Mars is the second most habitable planet in our solar system and is the most likely candidate to be a place where people could live, although that doesn't necessarily mean it's habitable at all. Besides the lack of atmosphere and extremely cold temperatures, Mars's air is almost solely comprised of carbon dioxide, which, if you try to breathe, would cause a panic attack and hypoxia and then suffocation all within minutes. Although within your spacesuit, that's not an issue for now. However, what is an issue is the radiation exposure and severe sandstorms. And the sandstorms on Mars are intense. Winds can approach 100 kilometers per hour, and the abrasive nature of the sand could easily strip the paint off your spaceship, wear down your spacesuit, and essentially turn your helmet's visor from clear glass into frosted glass in a few minutes. But even still, you're not quite dead yet, and throughout the rest of the day on Mars, you could live, assuming you have at least enough oxygen in your spacesuit to explore the barren surface. Although, when night comes, temperatures will drop, and you will be no longer. You respawn on the ship and head off to your next planet. And this is the beginning of things getting really crazy. As you approach the next planet, you realize something different. This planet is massive. It's not only the biggest planet that we've explored so far, but it's also the biggest planet in the entire solar system. This planet is Jupiter, and as you begin to successfully orbit this planet, you realize something. You're experiencing radiation sickness, and that's because Jupiter is extremely toxic, and before you can even get anywhere near the surface of Jupiter, which we'll discuss that in a second, you are going to be feeling the effects of the extreme radiation that comes from this toxic planet. But assuming you you and your suit are built different, you begin your descent into the planet of Jupiter. One of the first things that you're going to experience is the strange upper clouds. They're not made of sulfuric acid like on Venus. These clouds are lighter in color and composed of water vapor and ammonia. The temperature that we're already experiencing on the descent is already more than our suit can handle. But you're still in your ship and you're still safe for now. So you continue to descend. You notice things similar to Venus begin to get darker and darker, but more intensely than it did on Venus. And with that, you're also noticing that your ship is creaking, similar to what it did on Venus, meaning that the atmospheric pressure is getting intense. You would think that with Jupiter being so massive, its gravitational forces would be huge as well, but Jupiter's gravity is only about 2.4 times stronger than the gravity we experience here on Earth. As your descent continues and you're looking out the window, it's nearly pitch black and you can't see anything. Light isn't able to make it this deep onto the planet, and the pressure is getting intense. Even just 50 kilometers into the planet of Jupiter will have you experiencing pressure equivalent to around 1,000 bar. Keep in mind, the pressure on Venus was 92 bar. You're only 50 kilometers into Jupiter, and you're experiencing 1,000 bar pressure. Now, if you weren't in your indestructible ship, you would have frozen and been crushed into a ball long ago. But because you're in your ship, you're still continuing further. As the pressure increases and as you go deeper and deeper into the planet of Jupiter, one thing that you notice is peculiar is that it's no longer cold. It's actually hot, really hot. You notice that the temperature gauge on the outside of the ship is over 1,000 degrees Celsius, which, if you were exposed to, would instantly vaporize you. But because you're in your ship, you're still safe and still continuing deeper into the planet. At this point, you're struggling to decide when you can even get out of the ship and if you can at all. Because at this point, you've experienced extreme cold, extreme pressure, extreme heat, and now you're experiencing extreme storms with winds up to 400 kilometers per hour. And there's still no sign of any solid surface for you to land your ship on. You notice your ship reach something. It's not ground, but it's a liquidy surface, and it's good enough for you. You press the button, open the spaceship door, you step onto this surface of metallic hydrogen where your feet essentially get stuck and your body is instantly crushed and melted before you can even process what happened. Jupiter's a bit of a tough one because the deeper you go, the more hypothetical you get. And right now, the kind of going theory is that there is a core of metallic hydrogen and other heavy metals in liquid form, potentially surrounding a solid core, but also potentially not. The pressure and temperatures at the core of Jupiter are unimaginably intense. And in the instance of this experiment, this is as deep as you're gonna go, because your mission was to find out how you would die on Jupiter, not what the core of Jupiter is. Although that mission might have been a more productive mission to go on. However, right now the theory is actually that the core of Jupiter could potentially be hotter than the surface of the sun, which, if true, is just crazy to think about. But you don't have time to think, because you're already on your way to your next planet. And this planet, once again, poses brand new challenges. The challenges with surviving this planet begin with even getting close to it, because not only does Saturn have a plethora of moons, 146 as of now, but it also has its huge, massive, and cool rings, which are literally just orbiting pieces of older moons that crashed into each other or exploded for, I guess, other reasons. So before we even get close to this planet, we have a game of Space Invaders, avoiding asteroids and moon debris. But because you're a legend, you avoid all of that and you begin to get closer to Saturn, and you realize that you're going to be experiencing a lot of similarities to Jupiter. Specifically, because this planet is once again massive, and it's also comprised out of the same gases, helium and hydrogen. So you already know you're in for a world of pain. Literally a world of pain. Since the composition of Saturn is relatively similar to the composition of Jupiter, you decide that you're not going to wait until you reach some sort of core to get out of your spaceship. You're going to make sure that you're deep enough into the planet where it's dark and you know that you're fully immersed within the planet's contents, and then you're going to see what happens. And that's exactly what you did. You begin breaking through the initial clouds, and instantly you're once again met with ammonia crystals in the air and clouds and a thicker and denser fog. Your ship begins to descend slowly, your windows get covered in frost, and it begins to get darker and darker. And you realize that it's time to step out of the ship and see what happens. You press the button, the door opens, you step out, and you jump into the abyss. As soon as you step off of the ledge, you're not falling straight down. You are smacked by 1,800 km/h winds throwing you in multiple directions, as Saturn is experiencing consistent storms that would literally rip your body apart almost instantly. At this point, assuming you're extremely damaged but not killed, your body flying around and spinning out of control begins to fall deeper into Saturn. Already, the extreme cold is freezing you and killing you within your spacesuit, and the pressure is only getting more and more intense. But because on this particular day you were feeling extra resilient, you're able to survive these extremely cold temperatures and this wind and this intense pressure. You realize that the further you fall, once again, the warmer it gets. And the pressure only gets more and more bone crushing, until soon enough, your body lands into this metallic liquid surface, and your body is now literally a drop in the bucket. What used to be a human body in a spacesuit is now a vaporized liquid drop in an unbelievably hot core of a gas giant planet. You respawn in your ship. Fortunately, it's close to the surface. You exit this planet, make it through the minefield of moons and moon fragments once again, and you're out of the woods. You're no longer going into gas giants, but you're now getting into ice giants. And these planets aren't much better at all. And that's because they are still literally gas giants. They're not made of ice. They are just comprised of elements that are heavier than helium. And they are obviously extremely cold. Approaching the next planet in the first ice giant, you once again have to navigate a minefield of moon fragments. And once you've successfully navigated that, you are met with a beautiful sight. You look outside the window and bestow your eyes upon Uranus. Obviously, upon seeing it, the first thing you want to do is just get inside it. You need to penetrate Uranus to see what's inside, right? That's what this mission is all about. So before you could even orbit this planet, you simply begin to descend. And soon enough, you're penetrating the surface of Uranus. One of the first things that you notice is how dark it is at this part of the solar system. You are so far from the sun that even on the surface of Uranus, the surface level clouds, it is already pretty dark, and it's only gonna get darker the deeper you go. Upon penetrating Uranus, you're met with unbreathable and some toxic gases, with the majority of Uranus's atmosphere being comprised of hydrogen, helium, and methane, none of which are breathable for humans. But you've got your spacesuit on, and you're still in your ship, so you continue to dive deeper. It's not long before you notice the extreme cold, with temperatures already reaching negative 195 degrees Celsius, which, if you were outside, would be enough to almost instantly kill you. But you're still in your ship and still descending deeper into Uranus. And now you are getting into the heart of some of these storms happening on Uranus, with winds up to 900 kilometers per hour. Winds that could potentially be fatal and at the very least mess you up horribly. And as you continue to descend, it is extremely dark, the winds are horrible, and now your ship is being pelted, initially by ice-like crystals. And the deeper you go, you notice that these aren't crystals anymore. These are fully formed diamonds being pelted at your spaceship at over 900 kilometers per hour, something you haven't seen up until now. And at this moment, you're inspired to get out. You still haven't met any sort of solid surface yet, but you park your ship by hovering it, you press the button, and step out. You step into a 900 kilometer per hour gust of wind, and instantly are pelted with another gust of wind carrying diamonds in the opposite direction, going again 900 kilometers per hour, having your entire body be penetrated by these diamond fragments. And while you are dying and bleeding out and asphyxiating due to all of the holes in your spacesuit, you begin to notice the immense pressure crushing your body smaller and smaller in the intense heat that now exists at this deeper level. Uranus is regarded as the coldest planet in the solar system, but at this point, near the core of the planet, it is extremely hot, and you are being crushed, melted, vaporized, and pelted with diamonds. A fate quite similar to the last few you experienced, although this one at least includes diamonds, which is cool. But I think at this point, it's safe to say, playing in Uranus can definitely get dangerous. You're back on your ship, safe, and you're happy to be out of Uranus. So you quickly head to the final planet on this list, the second and final ice giant, that being Neptune. Now, I'll be honest, Neptune is extremely similar to Uranus as far as composition and what exactly would happen if you were to experience this planet. And because I can't make as many puns with this planet, I'm gonna keep this one relatively brief. Assuming you penetrate the surface of Neptune and decide to park the ship there and simply jump into the void, you would experience extremely cold temperatures, followed by extreme winds, and then rising temperatures and rising pressure until you are pelted by, once again, diamond rain, and then disintegrated into the darkness and abyss that is the core of Neptune. A story similar to the previous planets, but no less severe. Your death on Neptune, while instant, would be horrible. You respawn on your ship, and before heading back to Earth, you realize that you still have one respawn left. And because this is Trust Me Bro, and we're always extra, we decide to head to the forgotten planet of our lifetime. The dwarf planet that still exists in our solar system, but is no longer recognized as an official planet, and that would be Pluto. One of the first ways you could die in regards to Pluto is dying of boredom, because Pluto is so damn far away. But because we have Instagram Reels, you're able to entertain yourself for the entirety of the trip, and you are now orbiting the dwarf planet that nobody loves. You make your descent onto the surface of this planet, and you can only help but notice how small it is. It almost reminds you of the moon. But as you look back towards the sun, you notice something you haven't seen before. The sun, at this point, almost looks like a star in the distance. Sure, you can tell it's the sun, but it's at this point exceedingly small, and much smaller than it was when you were on Mercury. And speaking of Mercury, you notice once again that Pluto has almost no atmosphere, meaning that your landing was rough and you are in for some extremely strange experiences. Being this far from the sun means that it's dark and cold all of the time. And this is something that at this point you're just prepared for. You hit the button and step into negative 229 degrees Celsius temperatures, a temperature that you may notice is actually colder than liquid nitrogen. And because the surface of this planet is colder than liquid nitrogen, you would essentially experience what it would feel like to jump into a pool of liquid nitrogen. Any liquid on or around your body would instantly be boiled, and your skin would feel like it's almost burning. We've reached temperatures so cold they feel hot once again. Your skin would freeze, and all of your flesh, including your muscles, your fat, your everything, begin to turn into a frigid, hard solid. Every cell in your body would die and turn black, and your dark, mummified body would essentially live on as a statue on the surface of Pluto, literally frozen in time. And my only hope for you would be that you left yourself in a funny position, if you even had time to get there. And with that, you use your last respawn, you get back in your ship, and you head back to Earth. You have multiple logbooks full of your experience being documented, and once you return to NASA and hand in this information, they regretfully inform you that they appreciate you going on this trip, but they actually just developed a drone that could have done all of this. And the worst part is, they actually developed it before you left. But because you seemed so excited about going, they didn't want to break your spirit, so they let you go anyway. But at least you got to play in Uranus. Mythical creatures that turned out to be real. There's an old saying that goes, truth is stranger than fiction. And I would argue in the case of mythical creatures, this rule definitely applies. The concept of mythology and mythical creatures has existed for thousands upon thousands of years. And with such a long and rich history, it was only a matter of time until some of these mythical creatures turned out to not be myths at all. Which is why in today's double feature, I'm going to start the video by discussing mythical creatures that turned out to just be creatures, and then I'm going to discuss creatures that still remain mythical, but are heavily believed to be real. Let's begin. Mountain spirits. Deep within the Indonesian jungle lives a group of people known as the Moni people. The Moni are an indigenous tribe of people from the Central Papua and Western New Guinea regions of Indonesia. They primarily speak their own Moni language, and in total there is roughly 28,000 Moni people. Not much is publicly known or understood about the Moni people or their traditions. However, one piece of their culture that has now become sort of mainstream is the not-so-mythical creature known as the mountain spirits. For countless generations, the Moni people have passed down stories of a mysterious black and white creature that lived in the forest. And this creature was believed to be a spirit, a positive spirit that should be protected. The Moni people themselves even said that this mythical creature walked upright like a small man. And while that may seem interesting, for the longest time there was no evidence to back up the claim of this black and white small man spirit that inhabited this remote part of Indonesia. Which is why, for the longest time, the mountain spirit was considered to be something of myth to foreigners. That was until 1994, when the story of the spiritual mythical creature living deep within the Indonesian jungle came across the desk of a man named Tim Flannery. Tim Flannery was a highly decorated researcher from Australia. And when he heard the stories of the mythical creature, he knew there had to be something more to it than just fairy tales. Which is why he booked a flight and was determined to separate fact from fiction himself. After landing in Indonesia and traveling deep into the jungle to meet the Moni people, he was briefed on their customs and culture, and then was briefed on the mountain spirit. The Moni people informed Tim that the mountain spirit was elusive, being seen only rarely by the locals, and that if it was seen, it was to be respected, as it was believed that this mythical creature was a spiritual entity. Timothy could tell that the Moni people took this seriously because when he asked them if they'd ever try to hunt this creature, they instantly denied ever trying to hunt, attack, or approach the spirit, as it was something they almost instantly knew they were to protect. However, even with that interesting story and vague description of white and black creature that sometimes walks on two legs, Tim really didn't know what he was getting himself into. That was until he spent multiple days in the Indonesian jungle and didn't come face to face with any sort of mythical creature or spirit, but actually came in direct contact with a creature known as the dingoso. That's right, the mountain spirit is not a spirit at all. It's actually a rather endangered and extremely rare animal that, in my opinion, is actually more interesting than the mountain spirit ever could be. Let me explain. The dingo is a long-tailed marsupial that can only be found in mountain forests on the west side of New Guinea in Indonesia, which means that for the longest time, the Moni people were the only people in the entire world to even be aware of this animal, even if they did consider it to be a spirit, which honestly isn't unfair, because while they considered it spirit, the rest of the world considered it to be folktale and not even real at all. However, the Moni people knew what they saw, and in my opinion, you should always trust the locals. Back to the dingoso though. The dingoso is also a mammal that is roughly shaped like a bear. It lives in trees. It's the size of a Labrador dog, and believe it or not, it is technically a breed of kangaroo, which, if you ask me, is the most interesting and random combination of attributes you could probably imagine. Regardless, after Tim Flannery was able to confirm the existence of this mysterious creature in 1994, the entire suspicion of the mountain spirits just being fairy tale was broken and actually proven to be fact. And while this discovery was shocking news to the rest of the world, to the Moni people, this was simply affirming something they already knew. And fortunately, it didn't break their belief whatsoever. Even after Tim was able to confirm the existence of the dingoso and then later name it and categorize it, they still treated it as a sacred symbol and believed that the dingoso was the physical embodiment of the spirits of their ancestors, which, in my opinion, is pretty wholesome. Interestingly, at least in my opinion, if the Moni people didn't consider the dingoso to be so sacred, it would have likely been hunted, probably into extinction because of how rare and endangered this animal already is. And if that were to have happened, then realistically, the dingoso would have likely never been discovered by the scientific community and therefore remaining a mythical creature forever. Although we know that wasn't the case, and in 1994, the dingoso was proven to be a real animal and not just a mythical creature. Although it wasn't until 2009 when it was actually filmed for the first time ever after a BBC documentary crew and a local Moni tribesman spent 11 days in the jungle searching just to find one dingoso or mountain spirit. The devil bird. In rural Sri Lanka, there has been a long-told legend of a mythical creature known as the ulama, or the devil bird. The lore behind the devil bird was simple yet terrifying, and it was for those reasons that it quickly became legend. It is said that if you are in a rural part of Sri Lanka at night, potentially near a jungle or forest, then you could be at risk of hearing the blood-curdling, human-like shriek of the devil bird. Now, while you never saw the devil bird, the shriek alone was enough to turn your blood cold and terrify you, leaving most frozen in fear. However, this shriek wasn't only something that would temporarily scare you, as it had a deeper meaning. According to Sri Lankan folklore, the shriek of the devil bird wasn't only terrifying, it was an omen of imminent death. And it was believed that if you were outside at night and had been exposed to or have heard the shriek of the devil bird, you or someone you knew or loved was soon going to die. Just the lore alone around this mythical creature is enough to have you invested, even without any description of what it may or may not look like. And it's for this reason that this story was told and believed so heavily within Sri Lanka for generations and generations. Although, for people that were not local to Sri Lanka, when they were told about the devil bird custom, many people disregarded it as something of just that, legend, something of myth, something that was, well, downright not real or non-existent. That was until non-locals started to hear the shriek for themselves. And because the shriek was so terrifying and so human-like and so unlike anything that they've heard elsewhere before, biologists knew they had to take a closer look at what could possibly be causing this myth. Because it was too long-running to simply be one hoaxer, and it was too unique and terrifying to be something that was already currently known. And it was with that in 2001, after some time searching, experts were able to confirm with a high likelihood that the devil bird or ulama was maybe not as mythical as people once thought, and that it was more likely the spot-bellied eagle owl, a bird that in its own right is definitely terrifying. The spot-bellied eagle owl is a huge bird of prey that literally just looks terrifying, like it looks like a mythical creature. These birds live primarily in the forest and live mainly in India and Southeast Asia. They reportedly weigh around 3 pounds, and most notably, this owl is now famous after its semi-recently discovered human-sounding call. The call that essentially made this eagle owl a mythical creature in the first place. Now, with that being said, I know I can't keep talking about this legendary sound without showing it to you. So I'm gonna play a bit of audio of a recording somebody took of an actual spot-bellied eagle owl. But I did want to give fair warning in case you were superstitious yourself and did believe that this call may actually bring death to you or a loved one. Which, I wouldn't blame you if that were the case, but with that, here's the sound. Sea serpents. I see serpents. Do you see serpents? I'll tell you who saw serpents: sailors. Sailors saw serpents so often that they became legendary mythical creatures. Sea serpents were first reported as massive snake-like creatures that were found in deep, dangerous waters. And in folklore stories of these mythological creatures, they were described as dangerous, ship-attacking monsters. Stories of sea serpents exist in many different cultures and mythologies. For example, Norse mythology, Babylonian mythology, and even Greek mythology. But what if I told you that, once again, this mythical creature was perhaps not so mythical? For thousands of years, different cultures and civilizations described seeing a nearly impossibly long, snake-like creature approaching their boats and even attacking them. It was actually the persistence of these extremely similar stories being told across numerous cultures that actually inspired scientists in the 1700s to try to finally put this myth to bed once and for all. However, in their studies, they didn't find a nothing burger. What they actually found was fish tacos. That was corny, but we're keeping it in. No, but in reality, in 1772, scientists found what they believed to be what everybody was considering sea serpents to be in all of these different mythological accounts. This fish was identified as the oarfish. And the oarfish, similar to some of the other entries on this list, once again just goes to show that fact is sometimes stranger than fiction. The oarfish is an extremely long, ribbon-like fish that is typically only found deep in tropical oceans and is usually rarely ever seen by humans. One subsect of the oarfish, known as the giant oarfish, is the longest bony fish alive and can grow up to 36 feet long. Besides just being rare and massive, oarfish are also extremely unique because they have been sighted swimming vertically, meaning they're not, doing normal fish stuff. They're literally swimming as if they were walking to work. Besides their weird methods of transportation, they also have a rather unique look to them. They have a silvery, scaly body, but they also have a bright red dorsal fin along its back, which definitely makes it stand out against blue water and also gives it a rather mythical appearance to some individuals, further bolstering the theory that this never-before-seen fish was a mythical creature and not your average fish. Which, if you think about it, isn't unreasonable for somebody in the 15 or 1600s or even, earlier than that to see a crazy never-before-seen fish and to assume it's, well, something of myth rather than a never-before-seen fish because of how different it was from most fish we know today, or were even known at the time for that matter. Regardless, even though today it is commonly believed that most sea serpent accounts are simply encounters with oarfish, in the modern day, now that this mythical creature has been more or less demystified, it doesn't mean that there isn't any superstition still surrounding this fish. And what I mean by that is that even today, in 2026, the oarfish is still considered not a sea serpent, but a sign of a doomsday event coming. And I'm not joking. It is commonly believed by some that if you find an oarfish washed up on the beach somewhere, there is a very high chance that there will be a devastating earthquake or tsunami to happen shortly after the discovery of this fish. Now, while calling the oarfish a doomsday fish may seem like just another legendary attribute being associated with an animal that is real and not mythical, that superstition has unfortunately been bolstered in recent years. From 2009 to 2010 in Japan, there was over 20 oarfish sightings that were washed up on the beaches. And in 2011 in Japan, there was a tragic earthquake that ended up killing over 20,000 people, which has led some people to believe that potentially the sightings of the oarfish had something to do with it, or at least predicted the tragedy. Now, regardless of what you believe personally, I think the story of the oarfish is just so interesting. Because it started as a fish that was thought to be a sea serpent of legendary proportions, and then it was found out to just be an extremely odd and rare fish. But even then, within its scientific discovery, it took on a whole new meaning as a doomsday fish, which later went on to kind of prove that it may or may not have some mythical properties after all. The black swan. It is reported that in the 1400s, 1500s, and even 1600s in Europe, there was a saying that if you called something a black swan, you were essentially saying that something did not exist. Consider it a post-medieval way of saying when pigs fly. The analogy of a black swan was reportedly rather common, and it, for a long time, was rooted in fact. Across all of Europe, every swan that had ever been seen ever was white, and it was believed for that reason that swans across the globe were only white, because only white swans existed in Europe. Hence the existence and popularity of the black swan analogy. Regardless, up until 1697, according to Europe, swans were white and only white, and a swan of any other color was simply not possible. That was until 1697, when Dutch explorer William de Vlaming arrived in Western Australia on an expedition and just so happened to almost instantly be met with a creature that he and everybody he had ever known considered to be something that truly did not exist. He came face to face with a group of black swans. Obviously shocked, William knew that he had to take some examples home with him to prove he was not crazy, because if he did go home and claim to have seen black swans, he would not only be ridiculed, but potentially even be exiled for suggesting such a crazy thing. And it was with him showing the rest of Europe the existence of the black swan that the entire European mindset was essentially shifted. Initially only about the existence of other types of swans, but the lesson that was taught from this experience was pretty significant. The moral of the story that was kind of taken away from this entire experience down the line was that just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it's actually for that reason exactly that I wanted to add it in this video, because as almost every creature I've discussed has proven, just because you haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And the story of the black swan is almost a perfect example, because it wasn't even thought to have existed by anybody. It was literally thought to have never existed, and its mythology was actually in the fact that it could not exist simply because it had never been seen, and it was the opposite of what was seen. To Europe at the time, a black swan was the least likely thing possible, and I'm sure you see the irony. Regardless, the revelation of the existence of the black swan was so significant, in fact, that it actually coined a new term. Before this event, black swans were an analogy of something that simply could not happen, would not happen, does not exist. But after the discovery of black swans in Europe, the term black swan or black swan event was used to describe an event that was rare, unexpected, and challenged beliefs, or has or had outsized effects on society, which is pretty interesting to think about. The duck-billed bozo. Okay, I'm gonna keep this section short because it's technically not a mythical creature, but I really wanted to talk about it because this story is so funny. As most people probably know by now, platypuses are real, but also insane. And likely the best example of fact is stranger than fiction. And that's because platypuses literally have mythical creature level lore while being an extremely real creature. And platypuses have such mythical creature level lore that when the first platypus bodies were discovered by European naturalists, the Europeans actually believed that these bodies had to be mutilated bodies of an assortment of different animals because of how strange the platypus appeared. Let me set the scene. The year is 1799. A British explorer is in Australia, once again, and finds this weird creature. They don't know what it's called, they don't know what it's all about, but he sends it back to Britain. The naturalists in Britain examined this creature that was sent from Australia, and the conclusion they come to was not that this was some unseen animal, but they actually came to the conclusion that somebody must have tampered with this specimen simply because of how outrageous it was. At the time, the platypus was officially considered a hoax by the scientific community simply because of how weird it was. In case you're unfamiliar with exactly how strange platypuses are, let me fill you in. For starters, platypuses are essentially beavers with duck bills and otter feet. And it was actually that exact combination of animals that these British naturalists thought were put together by somebody on the ship who tampered with the specimen. On top of that, platypuses are mammals, but mammals that lay eggs, which is essentially a contradiction, but we're only getting started. On top of laying eggs, platypuses are also venomous. That's right, they basically have a little toenail or little horn on their fins that they will use to stab their prey with and inject them with venom. And if that wasn't crazy enough, while platypuses are amphibious, when they go underwater, they close their eyes and ears, making them deaf and blind, and it's because of this, in water, they rely on electromagnetic pulses to hunt, which they do rather effectively. And on top of that, they also outsource teeth. That's right, platypuses don't have teeth, but if they need to chew, they'll put rocks in their mouth so that they can use something to crush their food. Now, you might be asking, if they lay eggs, do they feed their young like birds? And the answer is, of course not. Since platypuses are mammals, they have milk, but they don't have nipples. They feed their young through their armpit milk. That's right, their milk comes out of their armpits. I could go on a lot longer about platypus facts, but I think you guys get the idea. Platypuses are so strange that when they were first discovered, they were considered to be a hoax or something of mythology. And even after describing this very real creature to you now, I'm still not convinced that platypuses aren't some mythical creature that snuck their way into reality. Like, I've made a lot of videos on mythical creatures back in the day. They actually were kind of the cornerstone of my channel. And if you watch those videos, well, you're definitely an OG. But I mention this because I have learned about and talked about plenty of mythical creatures that don't have nearly the cool lore that platypuses do, which, if nothing else, proves that truth is definitely stranger than fiction. But let's move on. Okay, I want to use this moment to mark the turning point in this video. As I mentioned earlier, this video is going to be a two-parter, basically a double feature. I wanted to start with creatures that were verifiably real, or at least extremely closely linked to real creatures, and scientifically believed to be those creatures. But now I'm going to discuss creatures that are either more loosely connected to real creatures that I didn't want to necessarily say as real because the connection's a bit loose, or creatures that essentially have no basis but are still heavily believed in some cultures. Of course, there was a bunch of other real mythical creatures I wanted to mention at the beginning of this video, but I can only add so many. So if you want to see a part 2 where I talk about more mythical creatures that are provably real, then please leave a like or leave a comment on this video saying part 2. And finally, I wanted to mention a few honorable mentions for the first part of this video. 2 other mythical creatures that turned out to be real are the gorilla and the Haast eagle. And the only reason I didn't mention them in this video was because I actually talked about them in my video last month about myths that turned out to be fact. So if you like this video about mythical creatures that turned out to be true and want to learn about myths that turned out to be fact, after this video, check out that video. I'm going to link it in the description, and I'm also going to pop it on screen at the end of the video. So don't worry about watching it now, but I figured I'd at least mention it because I'm sure some people are going to bring it up. But with that out of the way, let's discuss more mythical creatures with a bit of a looser basis in reality. The Chupacabra. Honestly, I was a bit torn on where to put the Chupacabra, because personally, I think that the explanation for it makes a lot of sense, and for that reason could kind of give a real explanation for this mythical creature. But because some descriptions of this creature are so different than the logical explanation, I figured it would be a safe bet to put it in this part of the video. Now, if you're not familiar, the Chupacabra is a legendary mythical creature from Latin America specifically, and it's most popular in places like Mexico or Puerto Rico. The name Chupacabra itself, it literally means goat sucker, and this mythical creature is referred to as the goat sucker because it almost has been exclusively reported to attack livestock, specifically goats in particular. Now, visual depictions of the Chupacabra kind of vary drastically. Some descriptions state that the Chupacabra looks like a short, reptilian, alien-looking creature that's a couple feet tall, covered in scales and green, while others say that it kind of looks like a hairless dog with sharp teeth, glowing eyes, and no fur. But regardless of what the mixed visual accounts of the Chupacabra look like, the one common denominator among all accounts is its trademark method of murder, which is, of course, to bite the neck of the goat, drain all its blood, and leave it for dead, essentially being vampiric in nature. And it's because of this consistent and strange method of attack, coupled with its strange look, that turned the Chupacabra into legendary folklore in Latin America, and now more parts of the world as well. Here's the deal. Some people that live in rural Latin America, whether they own livestock or not, believe in the Chupacabra deeply, and for that reason go to extra measures to ensure the safety of their animals, pets, or even themselves. And it's because of this, once again, like we've seen in other sections, that the widespread belief and fear caused scientists to take a closer look at what actually was going on, because they didn't believe there was a mythical creature on the loose, and for that reason, they wanted to get to the bottom of it. And the conclusion they came to after years of research was simple, but in my opinion, likely the case. Many scientists believe that the Chupacabra mythical creature is more of a sad situation than a legendary sighting. What they believe is that the Chupacabra, in most cases, is a wild dog or even coyote with a disease known as mange. And what mange does, at least in severe cases, is causes the animal's hair to fall out, causes them to be emaciated, and causes them to be extra aggressive. Traits that are almost exclusively associated with Chupacabra attacks and sightings. For scientists who believe that to be the case, they deem the story of the Chupacabra legend to kind of highlight how folklore can sort of spawn from real-world events, but through storytelling, exaggeration, and fear of the unknown, grown into something much different, and even in some cases, an entirely new entity of its own, causing a creature in reality to be the artistic inspiration for a creature in mythology. Vampires. Since we were on the topic of blood-sucking mythical creatures, I figured why not talk about the most iconic of all, the vampire. The stories of vampires exist across multiple different cultures, across multiple different eras of history. But most people typically associate vampires with Eastern Europe specifically. Think Transylvania. If I asked you to describe a generic vampire, what would you describe? Tall, skinny man, slicked back black hair, emaciated skinny face, sharp teeth, sunken in eyes, basically looking dead. Interestingly, descriptions of vampires have stayed relatively consistent from the 1800s to today. Although how this mythical folklore creature is treated definitely differs by time period. At the time of the vampire's establishment in the 18th century in Eastern Europe, the story of vampires was treated a lot more like fact than fiction. For good reason too. In countries like Romania and Albania, life was hard, and mysterious disease was prevalent. It was for this reason that individuals were looking for almost any explanation they could find on why people were seemingly dying mysterious deaths. And besides just theorizing on what it could potentially be, they decided to go directly to the source, which included digging up people who have died from these diseases. And what they found was gruesome. Upon digging up the graves of people that have died, they found bodies that they believed to look alive. But not only did they look alive, they looked like they had attacked somebody. Bodies that were dug up from these graves had blood around their mouths. Their body was bloated. It appeared that their hair and fingernails had grown. And it was then assumed that these individuals were not dead at all. They were simply playing dead during the day, but at night, they were becoming undead and causing some of these mysterious deaths. And it was this discovery that triggered a short-lived mass hysteria, which we later adopted into pop culture in the modern day, but I'll get to that later. The result of this mass hysteria depends on the region in which we're talking about, but some of the most common practices involved digging up bodies and chopping off their heads if they looked like they were vampires, burning coffins or burning people as soon as they die to prevent them from becoming vampires, or simply staking down bodies in coffins to prevent them from being able to get up. Now, it should be noted that this hysteria was typically shared among lower classes, and the royalty at the time in the regions were actively trying to disprove the vampire myth so that they could prevent the amount of bodies that were being dug up. And they eventually enacted laws to prevent tampering with graves to prevent more graves from being dug up, as they believed that the whole vampire hysteria was total garbage. Now, at a glance, it might seem interesting how these royals knew anything more than the common people. But then when you realize that, well, the royals were the really only people that had access to any sort of education, including education about biology, it becomes easier to understand how potentially these people could have more context on life and reality than people that are essentially kept in the dark and have to fight every single day to get a morsel of food. Regardless, after the hysteria died down, beliefs about vampires were extinguished for the most part. However, the legend did not die, and stories that were originally used as words of warning were now used for entertainment, and eventually evolved to the vampire stories that we now know and associate with the creature today. Mermaids. For hundreds of years, sailors across the globe from different cultures, from different civilizations, have all told similar stories of beautiful half-woman, half-fish creatures out at sea, either seducing, singing songs, or trying to lure these sailors, typically, to their doom. But what if I told you that the mythical creature of the mermaid may have more basis in reality than you may think? And in my opinion, the explanation that experts have come up with is utterly hilarious. I really don't think I need to explain what a mermaid is, so I'm just gonna kind of get into it. But right now, if you had to guess, what real-world animal do you think inspired the story of the mermaid? If I told you the manatee, would you believe me? Because that is, of course, the case. Now, while at a glance it may seem hilarious to suggest that a manatee could inspire the story of the mermaid, these experts do have some claims that have at least a bit of validity. For starters, manatees are large, typically human-sized, at least from a distance. They live mostly in warm coastal waters, and they are considered by some to have human-like characteristics. For starters, manatees are typically seen standing in shallow water, poking their heads out of the water, which at a distance, either in foggy water or rough water, could look like a person. They also have flippers that contain bones, which they can use in a similar fashion to human hands to try to grab or move objects. And if you weren't really looking, you could say they have a sort of humanoid shape, especially if you're only seeing the bottom of them above water and the top of them underwater. Now, interestingly, if you want a historical account, in 1493, Christopher Columbus himself reported seeing mermaids, but also noted that they were not nearly as beautiful as he expected, which does give more validity to the experts' theory that, well, mermaids were actually likely inspired by manatee sightings. But in my opinion, these sailors would have had to have a lot to drink if they saw manatees and started seeing beautiful women. Like, talk about beer goggles. Common scams everyone still falls for. The printer ink plot. Let me know if this sounds familiar. It's back to school season and you need a printer. You've got homework, projects, and lots of things that you need to print out, and for that reason, you're going to BroBuy to buy a printer. Luckily for you, there is tons of back-to-school sales, and you find the perfect printer for you for only $50. This printer looks solid, comes from a reputable brand, and even comes with ink. And although it was originally $100, for you, today it's $50. You buy this printer from BroBuy, you go back to your dorm room, and as the school semester begins, you realize your ink begins to get low. Obviously, ink is a consumable item, so you understand you have to replace it eventually, but this seems a bit quick. Regardless, you go back to BroBuy and begin to find the perfect ink replacement. Now, the first thing that's not really a scam, but is definitely irritating, is the crazy naming structure of ink cartridges. Like, if you somehow forgot to bring the Rosetta Stone to the printer ink section of BroBuy, you're gonna go home empty-handed or with ink that's not gonna fit your printer. Regardless, assuming you know exactly what you're looking for, you find this printer ink was not so much of a deal. The printer you bought only a month ago was $50, but this printer ink is $55. Obviously, this has to be a mistake, and you go to ask the employee if this is right, and they tell you, yeah, printer ink is expensive, it's hard to manufacture, blah, 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 blah. And you, being clever, decide that, well, if the ink is more, I'm just gonna buy another printer. But you go to the printer section only to realize that the printer is no longer on sale. And your options now are a $100 full price printer or $55 ink. And you take the $55 ink cartridge to the cash register, you check out, and you head home. If this sounds even remotely familiar to you, then I'm sorry to tell you, you have been scammed. Considering it's 2025, I would definitely say that most people are privy to the fact that printer ink cartridges are a scam. However, I would argue that most people are still oblivious to the fact of exactly how deep this scam runs, which is why this entry is on this list, and I'm going to expose the scam even further. To lay the foundation, the general business model of ink cartridge printers essentially goes like this. These companies produce a relatively quality printer, typically selling them with very thin margins or even sometimes at a loss, knowing that the real money is going to be made on the back end with their ink. And they ensure this back end business in multiple ways. The first method that these brands use is creating a proprietary ink cartridge that only works with their printers. This ensures that the consumer is not buying ink from other big brands or even smaller third parties that could give a better deal, meaning that the person who bought the cheap printer is now locked into their overpriced ink. But of course, it doesn't stop there. So now that we have a basic understanding of the bait and switch tactics that printer companies use to sell cheap printers but expensive ink, how else are they actually scamming you? Well, for starters, the cartridges that you are buying are basically empty. There are tons of videos online of people cracking open these ink cartridges only for them to be filled with foam and drops of ink, literally drops. According to some of the YouTube videos I saw, these ink cartridges claimed to have 11 milliliters of ink, but actually only contained 3 milliliters of usable ink, which is ridiculous if you keep in mind the fact that you're paying anywhere from $10 to $50 for this ink. Those are some pretty expensive milliliters. Not only are these printer companies forcing you to buy their cartridges and forcing you to pay egregious prices for minimal ink, these printers are also wasting this precious ink that you spent your hard-earned money on. No, literally, let's say that you want to print a full-page document in just black. Regardless of what you choose, your printer is still going to use black and color ink just because. Now, some people claim that the reason that printers do this is to ensure that your black is as vibrant and as rich as it could be. However, a YouTuber by the name of F-Stoppers tested this, and he printed out a document in black, and then he printed another document in black, but he covered the tip of the colored cartridge to see if there was a difference. And what he was able to confirm was both documents looked the exact same, meaning that the colored ink with the black ink made no difference in the final product, meaning that the printer is literally wasting your colored ink even on fully black prints. So while the printer companies say they're just enhancing your black with a little bit of blue or a little bit of pink, the reality is you cannot say no to this option and use only your black ink. And if you can't even say no to this function, to me, that's a scam. But once again, it doesn't end there. Not only are printers wasting your ink by adding colors you don't need to black prints, most cartridge printers go through something known as a cleaning cycle. And these typically occur either every time the printer is turned on or every time the printer prints something. And at a surface level, this makes sense. A printer is using a very fine tip to deliver a very precise amount of ink on a paper without having it bleed or smear. So for that reason, having a clean printer ink tip makes sense. However, this cleaning cycle is extremely wasteful. And not only does it just clean the tip of the cartridge, but in some cases, this cleaning cycle causes ink to come out of the cartridge and over time typically results in half of the ink cartridge being wasted just on this cleaning cycle. You can't tell me that's not at least a bit intentional, or at least hasn't been fixed for a reason. Oh, and don't even get me started on trying to refill these cartridges because, well, first of all, you literally can't even open them, and if you try to, there's an extremely high chance that your printer will just reject the tampered with cartridge to begin with. I've been talking about printers way too much, and we have a lot of ground to cover in this video. Oh, don't even get me started on the environmental aspect of all of the wasted cartridges and all of the toxic ink. That's a whole different disaster. The diamond disaster. Similar to the ink cartridge scam, I think that in this day and age, most people are privy to the fact that diamonds are not as rare as they say, and the market is for the most part propped up by manipulation and lies. And while I could make an entire video about the sheer depravity gravity of the diamond industry, covering topics like forced child labor and market manipulation. However, for the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus on one specific subset of the diamond industry, the diamond engagement ring scam. Imagine you're on the beach with the love of your life. You're both looking at the sunset when you realize that it's time to pop the question. You hold your soon-to-be fiance's hand, get down on one knee, and present her with a small, tiny box. Inside of that tiny box is a diamond wedding ring that costs twice your monthly salary. And you're just praying that she loves it. Your soon-to-be fiance looks down at the ring and then looks at you only to say yes. This, for most people, is one of the happiest days of their life. However, it's ironic because this is one of the biggest scams that most people fall for. And no, I'm not saying anything about the institution of marriage, but have you ever questioned why we propose with diamond engagement rings? Or think of what would have happened if you proposed without a diamond ring, or at least a ring that resembled a diamond? And while I can't answer that second question for you, I can definitely answer the first. And the short answer is marketing. That's right, the entire diamond engagement ring tradition actually took place because of an advertising campaign. During the late 1800s, diamonds were not rare at all, and huge diamond mines were discovered all across South Africa. And as a result, the market was flooded with many huge raw diamonds, essentially collapsing the entire diamond market. This was obviously detrimental for jewelers and anybody mining, processing, and selling raw diamonds, which is why the mining company De Beers had to think fast and change the trajectory of the diamond market forever. And that they did. Prior to the 1930s, when you proposed to somebody, a diamond ring was not a requirement whatsoever. It wasn't even a consideration. However, that all began to change in the late 1930s with one of De Beers' many marketing campaigns. At this time, De Beers was actively bombarding the public with messaging along the lines of, hey, the only way to prove your love to your soon-to-be fiancé is by giving her a valuable diamond ring. And in 1938, De Beers even coined the term, a diamond is forever, insinuating giving somebody a diamond ring at your proposal ensures everlasting love. Not only did De Beers plan a hostile takeover of the average American engagement, but they also planned a hostile takeover over your bank account. Because not only did they want you to buy a diamond ring for your engagement, but they also convinced you that the only acceptable ring was equivalent to 2 months of your take-home salary, which is once again insane and egregious. However, people bought it up, and this myth is still perpetuated to this day. But all isn't lost, right? Because even if you fall for this scam, at least diamonds have some sort of market and value, right? While that may be true in some cases, you are never going to get the value back you paid for your ring. And ironically enough, in 1999, the De Beers chairman, Nicky Oppenheimer, said, quote, diamonds are intrinsically worthless. Basically laughing in the face of everybody that De Beers manipulated over the last almost 100 years. So yeah, De Beers specifically made you feel obligated to buy a diamond ring with your proposal, made you feel worthless if you didn't spend way more than you could afford on it, and also made you feel stupid if you ever tried to sell it and realized that it's actually worth nowhere near what you paid for it. Which makes me think that the whole diamond is forever thing was basically just a slogan ensuring that people never resold their diamonds. But that's just a theory. Regardless, it's kind of just sad that a tradition that is so ingrained within our society is actually based in manipulation and lies. Oh, and if you watched our video a few weeks ago about the craziest conspiracies part 4, then you might remember me talking about the crazy cigarette advertisements of the 1930s that also changed the world. You know, the advertisements that literally had pregnant mothers and doctors promoting cigarettes? Yeah, the advertisements of the 1930s need to be studied because they had such a detrimental impact on society. But that's beyond the scope of this video. Let's keep moving. Textbook trickery. Picture this. You are in the kitchen looking at your laptop with your family all anxiously waiting around you. You have just received an email response from your dream college either accepting or denying your application. And this moment feels like it could be make or break. Reluctantly, you click on the email without even looking, and slowly you unsquint your eyes only to hear your parents scream and to see the email say, accepted. This is such an exciting moment and milestone that should be celebrated. A few months goes by and the beginning of the school semester starts. You go to the college orientation and you are given a list of books you need to buy for your courses for this semester. Awesome. You decide to go to the school bookstore only to realize that these textbooks were more money than you've ever spent in your entire life. For a lot of students, this is not only disheartening, but extremely detrimental. Because if you've just paid out of pocket or got into thousands and thousands of dollars of debt to go into school, only to then need to pay thousands more in textbooks, you could be putting yourself in a very bad spot. And if you're in school, your capacity to work is already low, meaning that you're setting yourself up not for the future you thought you had, but for a lifetime of debt. If you currently are or were a student within the last 20 years, then you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that college textbooks are literally a scam. Obviously, college textbooks are extremely expensive, but the scam goes far beyond that. In 2010, the average college student in America spent $1,200 per year on textbooks and school supplies, with the majority of that being textbooks. Similar to buying a diamond engagement ring, buying expensive textbooks seems like this is something that people have always done, but that's actually not the case. Over the last 30 years, college textbook prices have increased by 800%. And this gross exponential growth in textbook price doesn't only have an effect on the student's wallet, but also on their education. Because as of 2016, almost 65% of college students in America opted out of buying textbooks because they were too expensive. As they should, although not having the most up-to-date textbooks does directly have an impact on their ability to learn, affecting their education, the whole reason they're in school in the first place. And the textbook companies not only know this, but actually go the extra mile to ensure that the older textbooks not only have less value, but are also less helpful. Let me explain. Most college or university textbooks have a new edition every single year, and today typically include some sort of bonus content only accessible with the newest book. But this access code can only be used once, and typically the content that you are accessing you will only have for a certain amount of time. Some universities require you to buy a brand new textbook so that you can access this code to do extracurricular homework or to do additional tasks, meaning that colleges are not only complicit, but actually an active participant in the scam as well. Because in most cases, colleges get a commission from these hyperinflated textbook prices. And if you compare a previous edition to the most recent edition, there is typically little to no changes in terms of content within the textbook. However, there is one major change you will notice, and that is the order of the information. And the reason why this is one, so the textbook seems different because things are in different orders, but also primarily so that the textbook of the previous year is not usable to current students. Imagine if you're in a class and everybody else has the new textbook, but you have the old textbook. If you're asking somebody for help and they say, oh, flip to page 45, but your 45 isn't their 45, your experience is already dwindled because you didn't spend the money on a new book. That is an intentional scam that directly affects your learning experience. And if you're a company that literally sells textbooks, I have no idea how you can justify this practice at all. To me, this is insanely predatory and just upsetting. Don't be complicit in the scam. Inform your friends and also do what's best for your interest and your budget. These college textbook companies make enough money. Get a used copy, or if you find one online, well, I won't tell anybody. The diet pill debacle. The health and supplement industry is riddled with scams, and that topic is an entirely separate video on its own. But the supplements I want to focus on specifically are diet pills. Diet pills generally are any supplement that claim that they can help you lose fat or burn calories simply by taking the pill and doing nothing else. These supplements are largely cash grabs that prey upon insecure people, and it's truly upsetting. Most diet pills rely on deceptive marketing, white lies, and half-truths to even be able to make any sort of claim, and that's why I wanted to call them out and expose a lot of the scammery associated with diet pills specifically. If you're a bro that's ever had a little bit of flub on your chub and you just wished you could kind of get rid of it with the snap of your fingers, then you would have been the prime target for one of these diet pill companies. Because the entire dream that these diet pill companies sell is that they can help you take all of your insecurities and literally excess body fat away if you buy their product and, well, give them money. But the reality is that over-the-counter supplements are not able to help make this change. They do nothing at all. Diet pills, also known as fat burners in the fitness industry, typically contain one of two ingredients. The first ingredient is some sort of caffeine-based stimulant, and they may, in addition or potentially separately, also contain an unregulated herbal blend, both with the same goal of either suppressing your appetite or boosting your metabolism. Already, you might have noticed a massive issue with the whole unregulated herbal blend, and that's because this blend is being curated and sold by companies that truly do not care about the consumer because their entire business relies on scamming the consumer. Because nobody in the supplement or fitness industry really believes in any sort of fat-burning supplement. It just doesn't work, or at the very least, not in the way that they say it does. Regardless, these stimulant mixes and herbal blends are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to these fat burners, because assuming that they're at least safe, which they are in most cases, you're still being scammed, but at least you're not being scammed and poisoned. Now, the appetite suppression or potential metabolism boost you may find from these fat burners is negligible and doesn't cause a noticeable result at all in most individuals. What people who do take fat burners typically experience is a slightly reduced appetite and potentially a placebo effect. But even if this reduced appetite is causing you to lose weight, the weight loss is extremely not only negligible but also unsustainable if it even happens at all, simply because you're not addressing the core issue at play, which is typically your caloric intake and the amount of exercise you get on a daily basis. But besides the fact that the effects are either unsustainable or non-existent, these blends are not without their side effects. And common side effects from these fat burners include insomnia, anxiety, high blood pressure, and even digestive issue because of the massive amount of stimulants. Also, in combination with these herbal blends that your body may have never interacted with and may have an interesting reaction with. So already we're off to a rough start because the blends that they're using are questionable, and the results are actually, well, also once again questionable. But I think the nail in the coffin for fat burners or diet pills is definitely the deceptive marketing and business strategies that drive the entire industry. Roughly 95 to 99% of the entire fat burning supplement supplement industry use ridiculous before and after photos and have insane claims that are not backed by science whatsoever. And in the United States, the National Institute of Health has even stated that very few dietary supplements that have been marketed for weight loss have been proven to be effective at all. And what is more reported with fat burning and weight loss pills is not weight loss, but actually serious health complications, typically liver damage and heart problems. Two things often associated with unregulated herbal blends and caffeine abuse. And I know a lot of you might be thinking, wow, this guy talks really fast. He must drink a lot of caffeine himself. And truthfully, I don't do caffeine because this is me normally, and I couldn't imagine myself on caffeine. And I know you definitely wouldn't like it either. But predatory marketing and questionable ingredients aside, one of the biggest issues with the whole diet pill fat burning supplement industry is the fact that they rely on legal loopholes to keep their products on shelves. These companies know that they're selling scams, and these companies are doing everything they can to be just within the lines to still be technically legal. In a lot of cases, companies that are selling these fat burning pills are typically either rebranding or tweaking existing formulas depending on whether or not they've been banned by the FDA yet. If there is an existing fat burning blend, then companies can simply white label that product, slap their name on it, and sell it. However, if the FDA bans one of the ingredients in this formula, then all they need to do is simply swap that one ingredient and start a new brand that hasn't had their reputation tainted by the fact that they used banned ingredients by the FDA. One of the biggest loopholes that these supplement companies use is the actual term supplement. While these fat burners and diet pills have claims that would be reminiscent of a pharmaceutical drug or potentially something like a GLP-1 medication, these drugs are technically classified as a supplement, meaning that they have not gone through the rigorous testing and scrutiny that pharmaceutical drugs do. Now, that by itself doesn't mean that pharmaceutical drugs are off the hook. That's an entirely separate can of worms, but focusing on these supplements specifically, they leverage the fact that supplements have a lower bar when it comes to testing and a lower barrier of entry when it comes to getting into the market. Now, you might be asking yourself, how are diet pills and fat burners still selling in 2025 if they've been sold over the last, 20, 30, 40 years and they have been proven to not be effective? And the reason is, a sucker is born every day. Unfortunately, there's always going to be people that are unhappy with their self-image and struggling and looking for any sort of way to feel better or potentially make progress. And that's where these pills are able to take advantage of these people. And these brands know that, which is why they're remaining on shelves and still make sales in this day. And the whole weight loss, fat burning supplement industry is still a multi-billion-dollar business. These companies know that they're selling hopes and dreams in a bottle. And for that reason, I would consider them a scam. But if you're a bro who's considering buying some sort of weight loss supplement or fat burning pill, just understand that literally going on a 10 to 20 minute walk every day would be more effective and safer and cheaper than any fat burning supplement you could buy. Eat healthy food, get active, and enjoy your life. It's really that simple. Don't let companies tell you you're not enough or that you need their product to be worthy. Claw machine chaos. Before we get to the last entry on this list, if you guys have enjoyed this video about everyday scams you're probably still falling for, please feel free to let me know if you want a part 2 by either leaving a like or leaving a comment below. This video has been super fun to make, and unfortunately, there is so many scams to cover. Regardless, let's talk about claw machines because I am still salty right now. Picture this. You go to your favorite arcade, convert $100 of real money into 40,000 fake tokens. You take your tokens and you go to the large claw machine, and in there you find the cutest stuffed animal ever. You decide you're going to play a few rounds, and you end up spending the next 20 minutes using all of your credits, basically $100 real, trying to get the stuffed animal worth maybe 20 that you did not get. This may or may not have been a real situation that happened to me recently, and for that reason, claw machines are scams. I'm half joking. They're not a scam because I lost. They are a scam because I lost and I researched it and I found out they're a scam. Basically, every machine that takes money for a prize has something known as an adjustable payout. And what an adjustable payout is basically a mechanism within the computer, within this device that you're playing on or gaming on, that determines whether or not you're going to win or lose a prize. Claw machines are not a skill game. They're literally just gambling machines. And for that reason, under US law, they are classified as amusement machines, the same classification that slot machines are under. And they all basically work the same way. Now, going back to adjustable payouts, basically every prize-based machine can only be won once a certain threshold of money has been earned. Let me break it down. Let's say that there's a claw machine that has a bunch of toys that are worth $1 in it. Let's say that the person who owns the claw machine is really greedy. And let's say that he sets the adjustable payout to every time the claw machine makes $100, the claw machine will then officially have the strength required to pick up one of the $1 prizes. In that case, every 99 children is going to be very upset that they wasted their dollar and didn't get a prize. However, that very lucky and random one person who actually gets a claw that has any sort of strength to it is going to get a prize, and, well, they're going to get their dollar back in the form of that toy. However, for 99% of people, that is not the case. And the game that seemingly relies on skill actually ends up being a game of chance. So yeah, if you've ever used a claw machine and wondered why the thing was just so limp and if it would ever win ever, well, it will win, just not when you're playing, or at least not likely. And the claw does have strength behind it, but it's only gonna happen 1 out of 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 1,000 times. And that's how claw machines and all gaming machines make money. They have items that are worth X amount of money, and they'll only let you win once they've made their return that they want to make. So if you ever see a machine with really expensive items in it, just realize that it's going to take a lot of money for that prize to ever be paid out. And while it's actually really fun to go to arcades and play with claw machines, understand that you're paying for the experience and the fun. And you are in no way, shape, or form ever going to make a return in any form of gambling. How to survive a nuclear bomb. As you stand there helplessly, the only thing you can see is the one thing that will destroy everything you've ever known and loved. But interestingly, in that moment of morbid tranquility, you ask yourself, could all of this have just been prevented? And if not, is there any possible way you could survive? To answer that question fully, we need to take a few steps backwards to get the full picture, and then let the entire situation play out, ideally with a happy ending, if such a thing is even possible. It was a regular Friday afternoon. You were sitting on the couch, doom scrolling Instagram Reels, and you had the TV on just for some background noise. Everything felt right in the world until you were met with the ear-piercing screech of a television announcement. Quickly, almost as if it were hacked, your television goes from showing Wheel of Fortune to showing text on screen. And this text is met with an ominous voice telling you that intercontinental ballistic missiles have been launched directly at your country. And this was your one and only warning from the government, that you have 30 minutes to prepare and seek shelter, because after that 30 minutes, the world will never be the same. Instantly, thoughts are flooding through your brain. What are my first steps? Can I survive this explosion? Can I survive what happens after the explosion? And if I can survive both of those, can I survive what the world looks like after all the dust has finally settled? In this video, we're going to answer all of those questions, going step by step on exactly how you could survive a nuclear blast, nuclear fallout, and an extended nuclear winter. In this hypothetical situation, let's begin. The nuclear blast. So you just got the news. You have exactly 30 minutes until bombs are detonated in your exact area. And at this point, you're trying to find your next best steps, which ideally involve survival. But to see if survival is even possible, you must first understand the size of the bomb that is on its way to you and your proximity to where the bomb will be detonating. In a real-life situation, these two pieces of information would be luxuries you would likely not have access to. But for the sake of this hypothetical, let's just assume you do. Let's begin by focusing on that first variable. The type, or more specifically, size of the bomb is going to play one of the most important roles on your exact chances of survivability. The two nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan at the end of World War II are great points of reference because they are some of the most notable and studied explosions in modern history, at least in a non-controlled environment. But believe it or not, in the world of nuclear bombs, both Little Boy and Fat Man are relatively modest in the context of total nuclear bomb capabilities. And I say that in the most respectful and sensitive way possible. Obviously, hundreds of thousands of lives were lost due to those bombs. But even the smaller of those two bombs, the Little Boy only had a payload of roughly 15 kilotons, which, while massive, doesn't even hold a candle to the biggest airburst nuclear bomb ever tested, which would be the Tsar Bomba, an airburst nuclear bomb that had a payload of 50 megatons. And while it's kind of hard to explain, visuals don't lie. On screen is a graphic between the blast radius of a Little Boy versus the Tsar Bomba. As you can see, the Tsar Bomba has a much more devastating impact. And if you are trying to survive that, well, you're basically not, unless you are so far away from it that it wouldn't even affect you in the first place. Which, in the context of the Tsar Bomba, would have to be over at least 100 kilometers away, ideally closer to 300 plus kilometers away from the direct blast site. Now, with that being noted and said, let's use a more modest example for the sake of this video to keep things a little bit interesting. Assuming that you've been quickly able to find out that the bomb about to land in your general location is a 15 kiloton airburst nuclear device, a bomb basically identical to the Little Boy, you understand that while danger is imminent, there are chances of survival if you act accordingly. And fortunately for you, while still on the couch, you hear on the TV advice from the government. And they're telling you that your best chances of survival are to seek immediate shelter. Ideally in a concrete building far away from exterior walls or roofs, with deep, solid basements being the most ideal location. I guess besides actual fallout shelter, but assuming you don't have a fallout shelter, that's where you want to be. So quickly, you follow the device and go deep into your basement cellar and open up your phone to see exactly where the bomb is going to land, as this is truly what's going to determine your chances of survival. After opening your phone and checking the map, you can see that it's estimated that this airburst is going to land roughly downtown in your city, which for you is only 500 meters away. And while you may not be in the direct blast zone, you're definitely not in the clear. And it's actually times like this where people can make a fatal mistake. You see, looking at a blast radius, you can see that there is different areas of damage. There is the radius in which the initial fireball will reach, There is the radius where the initial heavy blast where the most damage will happen will reach. And then, of course, there is the radius in which the radiation will reach. And then there are the radiuses of the moderate to low damage sites and the extended thermal blast radius, all of which coming with their own unique dangers and ways to survive them. And the honest truth is, while it may seem intuitive at first to try to get as far away as you can from the initial blast site, that is typically not recommended for a number of reasons. For starters, by the time that you are aware of an ICBM coming your way, you will likely not be able to make a meaningful amount of distance between yourself and the bomb site due to limited time, and on top of that, in most cases, roads will jam instantly. And even if there is no traffic whatsoever, if you are actively driving out in the open and vulnerable, you could be unintentionally driving yourself into the fallout zone simply because you don't know which way the wind is going to take the fallout. So while you may be driving away from the blast site, you could be driving to the exact place where all the fallout is going to settle, making yourself extremely vulnerable and essentially sealing your fate. The only instances where it's truly recommended to actually try to escape a nuclear explosion, at least prior to its detonation, is if you are already tens of miles away outside of the detonation site and have also been given clear evacuation instructions by officials. And this has been proven in hypothetical scenarios where they have had 10 kiloton detonations in a city setting. But focusing back in on your situation, assuming you were able to find a cement cellar in your basement and you were able to confirm that you were in a danger zone but not the most dangerous zone, now you play the waiting game. Because as long as the structure you're in is sturdy and secure, you are very likely to be protected from all of the different hazards that are about to be instantly present with the detonation of this nuclear bomb, including the fireball, the heavy blast, the radiation, the thermal radiation, and even the extended moderate blast and radiation damage. And while in this hypothetical, once the detonation happens, you might be as safe as you can be, that is not going to be the case for everybody. And unfortunately, tens, if not hundreds of thousands, will die, depending on how heavily populated your city is. In your makeshift cellar, you were able to survive the initial detonation because you were out of the initial heavy blast zone, out of the fireball radius, and in the safest place you could possibly be. However, let me quickly explain what would happen to you if you happen to try to escape or were potentially in other areas, either closer or farther from that radius. If you happen to be exactly downtown at the immediate detonation site, outside and completely vulnerable, you would instantly be killed by a massive fireball. That is you and everybody else in a radius of roughly 180 meters. Assuming you weren't downtown particularly, but you're in a park just outside of downtown, call it 300 meters, you would be out of the fireball radius, but you would still be in the heavy blast damage radius. In this radius, almost every above ground structure is going to be leveled, and that includes you. The sheer force of the blast itself is enough to rupture your lungs and stop your heart almost instantly upon contact, meaning that you wouldn't really be able to see the bomb as much as you would be a near instant casualty of it. But let's assume we were even further away. Let's say that you were over a kilometer away from the detonation site of a 15 kiloton nuclear explosion, twice as far away as your friend in the bunker. If you were a kilometer away, outside and vulnerable, unfortunately, you would still be at a major risk of death. And by that, I mean almost guaranteed death. And that's because even though at this distance you'd likely be able to see the initial explosion and see the mushroom cloud form, you are by no means safe. The initial detonation of the bomb, even at this distance, would likely blind you temporarily. The shockwave, which wouldn't take long to reach you, while it wouldn't be considered heavy at this distance, it would still be considered moderate, meaning that that shockwave alone would be enough to at least burst your eardrums, as well as cause significant damage to your surroundings. But in case being blind and deaf wasn't bad enough, you still have the thermal radiation to deal with. Basically, the massive heat blast that comes off of the nuclear bomb. And this heat blast, even a kilometer out from the detonation site, would leave you with third-degree burns from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. But in most cases, this wouldn't even be an issue, because you wouldn't be alive to experience the pain of having all of those symptoms. However, if you were able to survive all of that, you would definitely not be able to survive what's about to happen next. But before we get to that, let's summarize where we're at. The first step to surviving a nuclear bomb, fallout, and winter is of course surviving the bomb's detonation. And as we've learned, your best chances of survival are simply getting as deep as you can, ideally in the most fortified building you can find. And beyond taking those intentional actions, there's really not much more you can do, besides praying and hoping that you're in a building that's strong enough and you're in a location that's far enough from the detonation site to allow you to survive it. And while it may seem overly simple or rudimentary, realistically, when you're discussing surviving nuclear bombs, there truly isn't many more options besides ducking and praying. And assuming in your case those two steps work for you, let's discuss what happens after the initial blast. Nuclear fallout. During the explosion, while you were in your bunker hearing what could only be described as the end of the world outside, you were at least safe and able to survive the initial blast. And while individuals 2 to 3 times further away from the detonation site, who didn't seek the same shelter as you or weren't able to find the same shelter as you, could have possibly survived, the reality is, even if they did, they wouldn't have wanted to, because of the sheer hell caused by these bombs as I described previously. You're in your cellar, you can tell that the house above you is leveled, and while your ears are ringing and your anxiety is at an all-time high, you are at least alive. And the big question is, what do you do next? It might seem like you have just won the lottery and you have survived the easiest part. You literally survived a nuclear bomb. But unfortunately, the hell has only begun, not ended. And at this point, you have only about 10 to 15 minutes before fallout begins falling from the sky. Nuclear fallout is essentially residual radioactive material that has been shot into the sky from the explosion, cooling in the atmosphere, and then falling back to the ground. This highly radioactive dirt and ash takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes to fall from the atmosphere to the ground, and in some cases, it's actually this fallout that can be just as deadly, if not deadlier, than the initial explosion. Typically, this fallout will fall in a radius around the detonation site. However, it's usually not a perfect circle due to wind conditions. And this wind, like we described in the first section, can actually take this nuclear fallout far away from the detonation site, affecting people that thought they were perfectly safe, making it even more dangerous. If you are somebody who was caught above ground and survived the initial explosion, now is your last chance to get underground. Because doing snow angels in radioactive fallout will not give you superpowers. It'll actually give you radiation poisoning that will kill you within hours to weeks depending on your exposure. Early signs of radiation sickness include vomiting and intense fatigue and headache. And if you were unfortunate enough to be outside, coming in direct contact with nuclear fallout, and then feel these symptoms on set, it's safe to say that in a short amount of time, you'll be kissing your life goodbye. However, if you were outside for the explosion but were able to make it inside before the fallout, the first thing you want to do is immediately secure the premises. Block any air vents, block any windows, change your clothes ideally, and even shower if possible. And at that point, you're basically in the same position as your friend who was in the bunker the whole time. Speaking of which, for the individuals that were in bunkers during the explosion, the only thing that you have to do at this point is wait. As the fallout begins to fall only 20 minutes after the explosion, the radioactive material quickly begins to decay. And that's because this radioactive fallout is strong but has a very short half-life. And it's been reported that in the first hour alone, over half the radiation is gone. And over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours, levels drop significantly, although not enough to go outside quite yet. After 48 hours, 80% of the radioactive energy is gone, although it is still deadly. And after 2 weeks, the radioactive energy is still present, although it's only 1% of what it originally was. In a situation like this, the United States government recommends staying in your safe place as long as physically possible. And while there, tuning into a radio broadcast and waiting for further instructions. And unfortunately, once again, that's basically all you can do. When will the broadcast come? Who knows? What will the broadcast say? No idea. And the only thing you can hope for is that you have enough supplies within your direct cellar or safe space to sustain the life of yourself and the ones around you long enough to receive those instructions and be able to act on them. Sitting in a dark basement listening to the radio might seem like a small price to pay to survive a literal nuclear blast. However, it's important to note that if the structure that you're in is compromised or not fully safe, meaning that it's primarily wood or plaster or not fully cement or well ventilated, in that 2-week period of time when you are waiting for the radiation to lose its potency and also waiting for further instructions, you could very easily still contract radiation sickness in your safe space if it is not a totally ideal environment. And unfortunately, in most cases, you won't know until it's too late and you start showing signs of radiation sickness. So to recap, after you are able to withstand the initial shock, blast, fireball, and everything that comes with a nuclear explosion, you then have to do, well, nothing. If you were fortunate enough to be informed and fortunate enough to have a safe enough environment that could withstand the blast, or is at least far enough away from the blast, you were already extremely lucky. And now all you need to do is wait at least 2 weeks in this basement to safely be able to venture out into the outside world. However, if after 2 weeks you still haven't received any sort of radio correspondence from your government, it's safe to say that things have gone very wrong. And sitting, starving, and dying in your shelter in that situation might just be better than seeing what the world outside holds in store for you. And while the topic of a nuclear winter is more of a hypothesis than something we've seen in practice, I figured it'd be worth at least mentioning to see how you could or would not be able to survive it. Nuclear winter. Everything we've described so far is kind of under the assumption that only one nuclear bomb was detonated. And I described in those cases, if you are informed and lucky, you can get into a safe location, stay there, and ideally in a timely fashion, receive life-saving instructions from your government that allows you to evacuate, survive, and slowly over time rebuild and get your life back to normal. However, what if that never happened? What if it wasn't just one bomb, and what if it was a full, all-out global nuclear war? Well, the hypothesized result of that would be a nuclear winter, which, while it's not something we've seen yet, scientists believe that it's actually a severe global event that would be the result of a large-scale nuclear war. Something that, while hasn't happened yet, isn't totally impossible. Interestingly, a nuclear winter isn't necessarily caused by the explosions of these nukes themselves. It's actually caused by all of the dirt, debris, soot, and carbon matter that gets put into the atmosphere from both the bombs and also the large-scale wildfires that is caused by the explosions. Like we've discussed, these nuclear bombs create a lot of heat. So much heat, in fact, that there is a radius around the blast site where the temperature of the Earth for a brief moment reaches the same temperature as the surface of the sun. And in this area and surrounding areas, fires are common. And when you have fires taking place in massive urban environments, especially in locations all across the globe, in the event of global nuclear war, you can see how this scale of all of the ash and soot and debris gets into the atmosphere and then begins to block sunlight, drop global temperatures, and truly change life as we know it. In 2023, for example, there was massive wildfires in Canada that for a brief period of time turned the entirety of New York City orange. It also caused the entire city to smell like burnt wood and also made the air quality extremely bad. That's definitely not a direct comparison to what a nuclear winter could look like, but that is an example of how ash in the atmosphere can quickly change the ecosystem of a location. And in the case of a nuclear winter, where there is so much ash and soot in the atmosphere that so much sunlight is blocked, it won't take long for global temperatures to drop and a sustained environmental impact to happen. In the past 1,000 years, there have been things known as regional little ice ages that have been documented in different parts of the world. For example, from 1300 to 1800 in Europe, it was documented that there was a little ice age due to volcanic eruptions that put ash in the atmosphere, causing temperatures to drop regionally. And these drops in temperature not only scared people, but also killed crops, killed livestock, and ultimately killed people with only a slight decrease in sunlight and average temperatures. And while that's a bit of an oversimplification, the video I made about the worst times to be born goes much more into detail about that, and I'll link it in the description to watch after if you're interested. But assuming a full-blown nuclear winter is as severe, if not more severe, than a couple volcanic eruptions, then we have a decent picture on what this scenario could look like. In the case of a full-blown nuclear winter, within weeks of these large-scale fires burning, sending soot into the stratosphere, the sunlight would gradually dim, temperatures would begin to drop, and what would normally feel like a warm spring day would quickly feel like a brisk autumn night. Crops that previously fed the world would die, livestock that would sustain millions would die, and the reality of food scarcity would become daunting. Even with significantly less mouths to feed in the event of a nuclear winter, food scarcity would still be a massive problem as the supply is now limited. There is realistically no way to produce more food in a world where sunlight cannot sustain the growth of plants, and therefore animals cannot be farmed or bred. In the early stages of a nuclear winter, your best chance of survival would be either having a massive stockpile of food at your disposal already, or quickly joining forces with other survivors and beginning to loot and homestead, helping protect each other, sustain each other, and gathering food and rationing whatever food you have sparingly. But if you've ever played a Fallout game, you know how easy it is to get along with people in an apocalyptic wasteland. That is, not at all. The long-term reality of a nuclear winter would result in multiple years of relying solely on the world's best stockpile or immense survival skills and technical know-how, as well as the mental fortitude of a Navy SEAL. Because while scrounging for food is one thing, living in a radioactive wasteland is something completely different. And the reality of the entire world in that scenario would essentially send you back to the Dark Ages, with remnants of modern-day technology. And it would be up to you and the rest of the survivors to slowly rebuild civilization as we once knew it. Beginning to reintroduce agriculture as the sun begins to re-emerge years into the winter, making makeshift electronics powered by batteries and wind turbines that you could leverage to do small tasks, and establishing trade and social hierarchy, two things we didn't have to worry about establishing since the Bronze Age. But yeah, while surviving a nuclear blast can be as simple as going into a bomb shelter or staying in a highly fortified basement, and then surviving the following fallout could be done successfully by then staying in said shelter, when you get onto the topic of nuclear winter, all of that kind of goes out the window. And it almost makes you ask yourself, if that's the world you're going to emerge to, is it even worth leaving that shelter or even going in the first place? And while I can't answer that question for you, it's just an interesting thought experiment, mostly because it's the most hypothetical and open-ended. And that's why there's an entire video game franchise and now TV show about living in a post-apocalyptic world. That, of course, being the Fallout franchise. And there's no game specifically about surviving the bomb itself or the fallout, because realistically, nobody wants to play a game where you hide in a cement basement for 14 days. That's the lifestyle of a true gamer, not a game a gamer wants to play. How to survive the deadliest animal attacks. You and your best bro are sitting on the couch watching TV. It almost seemed like this day could not get any more boring. And just as you were starting to get into the show on the television, it cuts to a commercial break. It was actually a commercial for a brand new experimental zoo that had just opened in your city. And as soon as you and your bro heard zoo and brand new, both of your ears perked up. One of the most interesting things that it was advertising was a safety course on how to survive the most common and deadly animal attacks. Now, since at this point you and your bro had already survived countless deadly locations, as well as numerous deadly survival myths, you figured why not take the opportunity to now also learn about how to survive deadly animal attacks. And without any further convincing required, you and your bro quickly change into your explorer outfits and you head to the zoo. As you and your friend arrive, you notice something peculiar. The parking lot is absolutely empty, and the zoo itself is massive. And it honestly doesn't even look like a zoo. It looks more like a prison, with walls that go endlessly into the horizon. And as you walked into the zoo and met the coordinator, you were informed that the TV ad was a bit misleading, that it actually wasn't a safety course, it was more of a crash course. However, there was a cash prize to be won if the crash course was completed successfully. And since you and your bro were not only bored, but broke, you figured, what did you have to lose? And with that, the coordinator led you to two massive steel doors. You and your friend walk in, and the doors slammed behind you. As you and your bro look ahead of you, you realize that this zoo is nothing like any zoo you've ever seen. There was no cages or doors or trails. It was literally just wilderness directly in front of you. Besides one table that had one pamphlet on it. And as you pick up this pamphlet, you see that it reads Animal Survival Guide. And as you begin to read it, you hear a voice over a PA system. That voice was the coordinator. And the coordinator tells you if you want to make it out of this challenge alive, you need to follow the rules in this pamphlet to a T. And they also inform you that every animal you encounter is going to be getting bigger in size as you get deeper into the enclosure. At this point, you and your bro know that you have bitten off way more than you could chew, and this was definitely not what you signed up for. But at this point, you had no other option. So you begin to walk into the wooded area. As you and your bro become fully immersed in the woods, you realize that while the circumstances may be a bit peculiar, you're in a rather beautiful location. The leaves are green, the trees are healthy, the grass is green, the flowers are plentiful, and you even notice that there is beehives and bees flying around. And while your bro decides to walk up to the flowers and approach the bees, you open the pamphlet and realize the first animal attack you have to survive is actually bees, the smallest creature in this entire zoo. And as you read through the pamphlet, you see that the first thing it emphasizes is that with bee attacks, prevention is key. Meaning that if you want to survive, or at least in this case, avoid a bee attack, the best way to do so is to be calm, slow, and gentle. And on top of that, avoid bright colors and strong perfumes. The pamphlet then goes on to state that bees typically are non-aggressive to people unless they feel threatened or are stepped on or the privacy of their nest is being encroached on. And while you are now armed with this information, you look up at your friend and are shocked. Your friend, in the bright blue jacket, wearing Axe body spray, is not only actively swatting at bees that are getting too close to him, but he is also trying to get a close look at the beehive. And it's this combination of moves that end up with him being attacked. And almost cartoonishly, you watch him run back and forth with his arms flailing until he runs so far ahead of you that you can't see him anymore. You wait for his screams to stop, you maneuver slowly around the bees, you respect their space, and seemingly magically, you're able to make it to the next area completely unscathed. However, as you meet up with your friend, you can't say the same for him, and his face looks like mine did in high school. Although fortunately, your friend is not allergic to bees. And while he's in pain, you and your friend are able to safely remove the stingers with a credit card, and you continue on your way, satisfied that you had just survived your first animal attack. One that may seem tame, although when you realize that the attacks are only going to get more dangerous from here on out, and the fact that if you did have a bee allergy, that encounter would be deadly, you realize that maybe this isn't so much of a walk in the park. As you and your bro exit the forest and enter a clearing, you notice something peculiar. It's a glass of water on a wooden stool in front of a small pond. At this point, your bro is already over the entire ordeal and just wants to get out and get his prize. And for that reason, he picks up the glass of water, pours it on his head to cool himself off, and begins to trek his way through that pond. But almost instantly, you realize that that wasn't a normal glass of water, and this wasn't a normal pond. Because sitting on top of your bro's head was a small and nearly transparent creature known as the box jellyfish. And it was actually a warning of what existed in the pond. Generally, most jellyfish are completely harmless. However, there are a few species that are very harmful, one of those specific species being the box jellyfish. Now, while you could argue that box jellyfish don't necessarily attack you, I would argue that they don't need to, because even just passively brushing against their tentacles could leave you in excruciating pain and potentially in the grave. Box jellyfish are particularly dangerous because they are so hard to see. As you and your bro did, or I guess didn't see in the glass of water, box jellyfish are almost transparent. And typically, you feel their tentacles burning your skin before you actually see the jellyfish itself, making encounters with them not uncommon and not pleasant whatsoever. Now, similar to bees, the best way to avoid a jellyfish attack would be avoidance. But since that's literally the case for any animal, I'm gonna stop saying that, although it is true. As you open up the pamphlet to learn about the box jellyfish, you read that the symptoms of coming in contact with a box jellyfish range from either mild skin irritation to severe pain, nausea, and cardiac complications, and the complexity and severity of your symptoms really depend on the amount of venom you become exposed to. Now, armed with this information, you look up from the pamphlet and see that your bro is already halfway through the pond, neck deep in this water. And because of this, you ask him, "Hey, do you feel like you're touching anything in the water?" And he replies, "Yeah, I do actually. It feels like there's invisible marshmallows, but I can't feel anything." That is, until moments later when you hear your friend begin to scream in agonizing pain. You watch him run out of the pond, and standing on the other side, you see him covered from the neck down with long stripes of inflamed skin, areas that got in contact with these jellyfish. And there's still even remnants of jellyfish tentacles sitting on his skin, furthering the exposure and worsening the pain. Knowing that you too have to walk through this pond, you desperately look around for anything that could potentially help you. And it's at that point when you once again consult the pamphlet and read that one of the best ways to avoid stings is to wear a sting suit, or even a traditional wetsuit. And while you don't have access to a wetsuit, you do your very best to insulate the clothes you're wearing. You tuck your pants into your socks, your shirt into your pants, and you put your hands deeply in your pocket. And once you've become as insulated as possible, you try to quickly make your way around the edge of the pond, only going about waist deep in the water and thankfully avoiding a jellyfish attack. Although now that your friend is really looking worse for wear, you once again consult the book about potential remedies for jellyfish attacks. And while your friend is already mentally preparing for a golden shower, you inform him that the book says that fresh water and urine are actually not helpful for jellyfish stings, and they in most cases make it worse. And what you really want to use to neutralize the venom and end the pain is vinegar. Unfortunately, sitting right beside your friend was a large jug of white vinegar. And as you begin to pour it all over your bro, he instantly begins to feel better. And after the vinegar has been used up, you take your handkerchief out of your pocket, you begin to wipe off the tentacles that are still on his body. In this case, your friend was lucky enough to not require medical attention. However, in severe cases of box jellyfish stings, or where a large group of stings happen, it is advised you seek medical attention immediately, as in those cases you may require antivenom to survive. Leaving the pond and heading back to the woods, you and your friend understand that perhaps we should be a bit more careful when approaching these animals, because this obviously is not their first rodeo. And if bees and jellyfish are giving us this much of a hard time, we might not stand a chance against the real predators. Heading back into the woods, you notice once again a small clearing. Although there's no pond, there is simply a stick in the grass. And while at this point you both know better than to grab it, you do slowly approach it to see what it could be. And as you approach it, the stick turns out to be not a stick at all. And it's actually a king cobra, the longest venomous snake in the entire world. It's also a snake that carries a powerful neurotoxin that can seriously mess you up. Instinctually, you and your bro take a few steps back and you instantly consult the pamphlet. And it begins by telling you exactly how deadly and dangerous a king cobra is, and then it tells you what you should do if you encounter it. The first step it recommends is remaining absolutely dead calm. Sudden movements are the perfect way to make the cobra feel threatened and provoke an attack, something you don't want to happen. That means you cannot just run away, and you cannot try to strike it yourself. Since you're already in close proximity to the king cobra and have pissed it off by encroaching on its personal space, it may seem helpful to try to kick it to just, get it out of your way and to scare it off. But realistically, a king cobra can bite much faster than you can kick, and extending your leg towards it is only going to result in a bite that could take your life. And what the pamphlet actually recommends is to do nothing of the sort. Now that you and your bro have already separated yourselves from the snake, it's important to analyze how the snake is feeling. And with the king cobra Specifically, if their hood is spread out and their body is off the ground and they are hissing loudly, that means they are peak mad. And your best bet is to create as much space as possible. If this situation was to happen in a real-world scenario, your best bet would be to retrace your steps and leave. But in this case, with you and your bro having to move forward, you have to get creative. And what you and your bro decide to do is to quickly separate and begin moving in opposite directions, almost moving in a circle around the snake. That way, you and your bro could each keep an optimal distance from the king cobra and also mitigate your chances of being bit, because realistically, the cobra can only go after one of you if it decides to strike. Unfortunately, even though you and your bro accidentally made this king cobra extremely upset, you were able to pass by it successfully by remaining calm, moving slowly, and keeping your distance. And for that reason, preventing a true attack. Now, if you and your bro weren't so lucky and happened to be bit by the cobra, as the pamphlet states, the best course of action is to still remain calm, but begin taking immediate measures. And what it recommends is immobilizing the limb that was bit and keeping it at or below your heart level. Beyond just that, the pamphlet also recommends removing any tight clothing or jewelry, as your body will begin to swell, and it also recommends against cutting the wound or sucking out venom, as that has not been shown to be an effective preventative measure. Once you've immobilized your limb and removed tight clothing and are trying your best to remain calm, the final thing you must do is seek medical attention, because the neurotoxin in king cobra venom causes paralysis, and if left untreated, can paralyze your lungs, causing you to die. However, fortunately, in this case, your friend did not have a near-death experience, although you're far from out of the woods. As you and your bro stumble into the next clearing, you notice that there's no bees, no jellyfish, no venomous sticks in the grass, but you do see a small, gray, fuzzy thing. It's just sitting there in the grass, and you and your bro can't make out what it is. And at this point, knowing better than just to run up to it, you and your bro decide to yell at it to try to get its attention, because it's obviously something. And after a few shouts, you notice that this ball is moving, and it turns its head to look at you, and what you see is the most adorable puppy you've ever seen. This puppy is all sad and alone and is shaking and crying. Only moments after seeing the innocent face of this puppy, you couldn't help yourself but to go and comfort it. And as you approach this puppy and pick it up, it begins to lick you and love you, and it honestly looks like it's much happier. And for the first time so far in the zoo, you guys are actually enjoying yourselves and feel like you're catching a break. Although your precious puppy time is quickly cut short when you hear a familiar noise in the distance. It's not the bark of a dog, but the howl of a wolf. And you quickly realize that this is a wolf pup, and the pack was about to return sooner rather than later. But before you can even put the puppy down and head on your way, you notice the pack arriving. And judging by the visible ribs on their sides, they had just come back from an unsuccessful hunt. Now, in most cases, wolf attacks are extremely rare, for humans that is. Although, because you are in the wolf's territory, currently engaging with a wolf pup, the pack has no choice but to challenge you and protect their young. As you put the pup down and begin to retrace your steps, the wolves begin to close in on you, and you quickly refer to the pamphlet. And the first thing the pamphlet says is do not run if you encounter wild wolves. Running will only trigger their chase instinct, and will trigger a single wolf or an entire wolf pack to chase you down until the end. Instead, what you should do if you are in a situation where there is a wolf angry at you is to stand tall and make yourself appear as large as possible. And you do exactly that. You take off your backpacks, put them above your head, and begin shouting the most aggressive nonsense you can conjure. And quickly, with your arms in the air and your dominance being asserted, the wolves don't back off, but they do pause in their approach towards you. Consulting the book once again as you are making progress, you read that the next step is to slowly back away while keeping your eyes on the animal and maintaining your confident posture. If you turn your back to the animal or begin to crouch or slouch, this may signal weakness, once again triggering an attack. As you and your bro are standing confidently, you notice the wolf pack begin to no longer circle you and congregate around the pup in front of you, meaning that you're no longer surrounded, but you still have a pack to go through if you want to complete the challenge. And it's because of this that you continue to read the pamphlet, and it informs you that if you are not able to safely back away from wolves, your next best bet is to throw things at it. Sticks, rocks, or even your backpacks are great ways to deter escalation. And in this case, your bro throws his backpack directly at the pack, missing the wolves but startling them enough to begin backing away themselves. As you've learned from the pamphlet, wolves tend to avoid people and do not see humans as prey, and these wolves do not want to attack you. And now that they've been able to gather their pup and congregate, they are much more likely to leave than attack, And that is exactly what's happening after your bro threw his backpack. And as the wolves begin to head on their way, you throw your backpack as well, and you and your bro continue to stand strong until they are completely out of sight. And it's at that point when you collect your bags and continue walking, heading back into the woods and making your way to the next clearing. You and your bro are beginning to feel confident because you're consistently learning and successfully avoiding, or at least surviving, animal attacks. Although little did you and your bro know that the attacks to come would be far beyond just humbling. As you make your way into the next clearing, you notice that this clearing's for once empty. There's no sticks, there's no fuzzball, there's no bees, there's literally nothing. But upon a closer inspection, there is a pile of dirt basically right in front of you. This pile of dirt is covered in flies and honestly smells pretty gross. And while your bro thinks this might be an anthill and that the next animal attack is fire ants, you realize that what you're looking at is not an anthill, it's a pile of animal feces. And you notice beside it are prints that are large and look like paws. And putting two and two together, you realize that these feces came from a predator, and the predator is not far at all. As you crouch down to get a better look at the paw prints in the soil, your bro is quickly attacked by a mountain lion. And now the clock is ticking before your friend becomes dinner for this animal. As your friend is face down in the dirt and the mountain lion is biting into its backpack, you quickly consult the pamphlet. And the pamphlet informs you that mountain lions are stealth hunters, which is why it jumped out of the bushes to attack your friend, although they typically don't attack humans. However, in this case, the mountain lion must have thought your friend was a deer. And mountain lions are rather unique in their attack style, because not many predators try to ambush their prey like mountain lions, making them extra dangerous if you happen to get mistaken for something they're actually looking for. Regardless, time is of the essence, and right now, preventative measures or looking big is simply not an option. It is life or death for your bro, and you quickly begin shouting life-saving advice at him from the pamphlet. The first recommendation is to fight back aggressively and immediately. And instantly, your bro flips over and begins trying to drive a wedge between himself and the mountain lion via his legs. And the next thing you shout now that he is more vulnerable is to protect your head and neck and chest. These are some of the most vulnerable areas on your body that one slash from a mountain lion could easily kill you with. And for that reason, you try to keep your legs near your chest and you cover your face and neck with your forearm and elbows. And now you inform him that when the opportunity arises, strike the sensitive areas of the mountain lion, specifically the eyes and nose. And he begins to bash the nose of the mountain lion with his elbow, and as the mountain lion becomes stunned by its prey fighting back, he quickly mashes his fist on the eye of the mountain lion. As you continue to read, you see that it's crucial to fight back as aggressively as possible and to not play dead, because similar to running, playing dead will only trigger an attack response from these animals. And your best chance of surviving an attack is to resist as much as possible to prove to the animal that you are simply not worth fighting. And in the case of your bro, that is exactly what happens. The mountain lion begins to quickly back away. He gets on his knees and then on his feet, and once again, you two both assume a confident, tall stance, causing the predator to back away into the bushes that it only recently jumped out of. Recouping with your bro, you guys are both, at this point, questioning your decision, but also understanding that there is truly no heading back at this point. You quickly check your friend to make sure he's not bleeding from anywhere vital, and you continue back into the woods. You notice the ground getting marshier and the trees getting more droopy, and you realize you're heading out of the woods and into the swamp. And while you didn't expect Shrek to be one of the predators on this list, at this point, anything is possible. Although this time, it's different than before. The water is murky. There's vegetation both on the shoreline and in the water. And while you know you need to cross this body of water, you still don't know what lies within it. That is, until two eyes pop out of the water. And while your friend still isn't convinced it's not Shrek, you know exactly what you're looking at. It's an alligator. Alligators are no doubt terrifying, but they're also so interesting because they are literally like living dinosaurs. But on this particular day, you don't feel like getting up close and personal with a relic from the dinosaur era. As you consult the pamphlet, the first thing you see is that it's recommended that if you encounter an alligator to maintain a safe distance. And it's recommended to have at least a 20 or 30 foot gap between yourself and the alligator. And while you know you're already much closer than that and have to get closer in order to pass it, you continue reading to see if there's any additional information to survive the unlikely but possible attack. One thing you know in the pamphlet is that alligator attacks on humans are rare. Although in your case, you're getting attacked by every animal, so that doesn't mean much to you. And in the cases of alligator versus human brawls, alligators typically attack because they either felt threatened or had their nest encroached upon, or they even potentially mistook a person for prey. And while you understand that you could basically fall into any of those categories, you don't feel super confident about crossing this body of water. Your bro, with the worst luck in the world and apparently a death wish, interrupts your reading and tells you an alligator can't bite what it can't catch, and he sprints into the body of water, hoping to get through as quickly as possible. Although, unfortunately for him, he literally ran directly into the jaws of the alligator. And now, you're once again yelling life-saving advice to him. One of the first things you read, once again, is that if you get into a situation with an alligator, it's best to fight back immediately. Not by trying to pry its jaws open, because you have no chance at doing that, but by, once again, targeting sensitive areas. Alligator's primary method of attack is using a powerful bite to subdue prey. So if you can strike its eyes or nose to try to have it loosen its grip, you can ideally get out of its jaws and run fast away. And that's exactly what your bro does. He begins plunging his thumbs into the eyes of the alligator, causing the alligator to open its mouth only slightly, allowing your bro to roll out of the mouth of the alligator, swim across the body of water, and run like hell away from it. And as you read the pamphlet, you see that running away from alligators is highly recommended. And it's even stated that while alligators are fast in short bursts on land, they cannot outrun humans over longer distances. Meaning that there's no need to run in a zigzag pattern, and you can run as fast as you can, as far as you can, away in a straight line. Now, as you continue to read, you see that even if you survive an alligator attack, you're not in the clear just yet. Because if one of the teeth penetrates your skin, the bacteria in the alligator's mouth could cause a nasty infection. Although fortunately for your bro, the bites didn't penetrate through the backpack or the jacket he was wearing, meaning that he was bruised up, but alive. And after your bro's scuffle with the alligator, the scaly guy decided to kick rocks and swim down the stream, leaving the body of water safe for you to cross, allowing you to once again reunite with your unlucky buddy. As you both begin to catch your breath before you head into the next section of the arena, you hear a buzzing over the PA, and then you hear the voice of the coordinator. And the coordinator says that you and your bro are doing well, and that there are only 2 challenges left before you get the large prize. That is, if you survive. But that isn't the only thing the coordinator says. The coordinator also says to you directly watching at home, if you are enjoying this video about how to survive different animal attacks and want to see a part 2, leave a like or leave a comment on the video saying part 2. And if you want to see Trust Me Bro hit 2 million subscribers, make sure to subscribe if you're not already. And with that amazing message from the coordinator out of the way, let's get to the final challenges in this rather experimental house of horrors that is this zoo. As you make your way into one of the final clearings, you see the unmistakable sight of a tiger right in front of you. Although this tiger doesn't look quite right. This tiger looks skinny, frail, and gray in the face. You can tell this tiger is elderly, and you're almost curious if the zoo ran out of budget for its predators. But as you consult the pamphlet, before you even get anywhere near the tiger, you understand why there is an old tiger specifically in this zoo. As you read, you are informed that tigers typically hunt alone and usually target medium to large sized prey, such as wild boar, deer, and other animals. And human attacks for tigers aren't as uncommon as other animals we've discussed. And the most common instances where tigers attack humans are when a tiger is old, injured, or feels threatened. And these sorts of attacks are even more common in areas where both humans and tigers live in close proximity, such as rural villages and areas like that. Now knowing why there is an elderly tiger in front of you, you take pity on your bro, hand him the pamphlet, and tell him that you're gonna take one for the team, and all you ask him to do is read you the survival tactics. Fortunately, you remember exactly how to survive a mountain lion attack. And assuming a tiger is similar, you plan on using the same moves. And to save time, you don't only approach the tiger, you also begin to just lay on the ground in a defensive position, almost to call it on to you. And as the tiger begins to approach you and then poke you with its nose, you begin waiting for your friend to give you the next steps. But as you glance over at your friend as you are covering your head, you see that he is standing there cluelessly, picking his nose, and you realize you're left to your own devices. Without having any professional advice, you decide to go with Old Reliable. And as this tiger begins to mount you and open up its mouth to show off its massive teeth, you kick Terry the tiger right in the tiger testicles and make this elderly tiger scream in pain and run away crying like a little kitten. Obviously, that's no real survival strategy, but in a pinch, it just happened to work. And as you backtrack to your friend, you rip the pamphlet out of his hand, smack him over the head with it, and continue onto the final portion of this crazy zoo's survival challenge. Heading out of the woods, once and for all, you're met with the beach, and the biggest body of water you've encountered so far. At this point, you're curious how all of this has even fit in this zoo, but you're honestly too over it to even ask. Luckily, this body of water is not something you have to swim through, because there is an albeit rickety bridge going directly across it. And while it's so long you can't see the other end of it, due to the fog that is over the water, you and your bro assume that this bridge is actually what's going to take you out, because there's no animals that live on bridges. And it's for this reason that you and your bro are sprinting down this bridge to just be done with the zoo, grateful that you're actually alive. However, as you're sprinting on this bridge through the fog clears and you notice a massive gap in the bridge directly in front of you. But unfortunately, it's too late to stop, and you and your bro are both dropped into the water. Luckily, it's only a short gap between the end of the bridge and the beginning of the second part of it. But during your time in this water, you understand why this bridge is here, and you have just met the final predator in this video. Because your friend is so bruised and banged up, you quickly notice that the blood from his clothes are seeping into the water, and this blood in the water is attracting nearby sharks. And before you know it, you have two great white sharks circling you and your bro. Now, like most people know at this point, great white sharks are not trying to hunt humans particularly, although they are curious and will give a test bite to unfamiliar things, and will give more than a test bite to things they deem to be prey. And while these sharks don't see you and your bro as food, they don't know what to make of you and decide to learn a bit more. And as one of the sharks begins to approach your bro, you quickly begin reading on what he should do. As the shark approaches your friend and he gets more and more terrified, you tell him, hey, the pamphlet says to stay calm, maintain eye contact, and avoid splashing. You cannot outswim a great white shark, and it's not even worth trying. What you should do instead is keep yourself vertical and slowly back away. And while your friend seems receptive to this information, panic got the best of him. And as the shark swam by his leg, he kicked the shark in the nose, instantly angering it, causing the great white to circle back around in preparation for a bite. Seeing what's inevitably going to happen, you continue to read and see that the book states that if you are bitten, you need to defend yourself immediately, aiming specifically for the eyes, gills, or snout, ideally with any object you have, or in the worst case, your fists. Even a small bite from a great white shark can be deadly, meaning that you have absolutely no margin for error. Feeling unconfident that your friend's going to be able to protect himself in this situation, you decide to do something rash. As the shark swim past you, while being focused on your friend, you decide to throw your backpack at the shark, giving it something to focus on. And as the shark bites on your backpack, you dive your fist deep into its gills, hoping to prove that you and your friend are not worth messing with. Unfortunately, it works, and the two sharks swim away. But now you have no backpack. But a backpack is a small price to pay for your life. You and your bro quickly swim to the other side of the bridge and continue to walk until the bridge leads to the shore, and on the shore you see a building and a wall, similar to the wall that you approached on your way in, and two metal doors once again. You approach these doors and they instantly open for you, and you are met with a bright, shining light. This is what you've been waiting for. This is the room with the prize. This is everything you've wanted. And as you walk through the metal doors and walk into this very, very overwhelmingly bright room, you are met with the zoo's gift shop. And the coordinator you met previously hands both you and your bro 2 t-shirt vouchers to get a free t-shirt that says, "I went to the worst zoo ever, and all I got was this t-shirt." Not wanting to go home empty-handed, you and your bro collect your shirts and head home, vowing to never visit sketchy zoos ever again. How would you describe a ninja? I don't know, probably black hood, black robes, samurai sword, something like that. Oh yeah, cool. What if I told you were completely wrong and that was completely stupid? Well, I'd feel like a dumbass. Well, you sure look like one, but don't worry. In this video, I'm going to explain and debunk some very common historical misconceptions. So like I was just explaining to my friend, the way that we commonly imagine ninjas is almost completely inaccurate to the way that they actually looked. Ninjas looked nothing like that, and there was no such thing as a ninja uniform at all. Ninjas typically wore civilian clothing to blend in with everyone else. If you think about it, it makes sense to look like everyone else so they wouldn't draw attention to themselves. Walking around in an all-black hooded outfit with a sword on your back would probably cause some suspicion. Even during nighttime operations, ninjas would wear navy blue, not black. 1, to hide the stains of blood better. 2, because the navy blue would actually blend into the night sky better than black would. Ninjas were spies, assassins, covert agents, and their ultimate goal and specialty was to hide in plain sight. So the next time a kid comes to your door on Halloween dressed up as a historically inaccurate ninja, make sure you let him know that, hey, you don't look like a ninja, you look like a dummy, and you're not getting any candy, pajama kid. The next misconception is that people only live to be like 30 in the Middle Ages. That's not true at all. It is an accurate statement to say the life expectancy was shorter in the Middle Ages, however, not nearly as much shorter as you may think. For example, a fully grown, healthy 21-year-old man in medieval times could be expected to live all the way to the age of 64, which isn't necessarily super old, but definitely not, dying in your 30s or 40s. The largest reason for this misconception and common discrepancy is the fact that infant mortality in the Middle Ages was just so high, which is a problem we almost don't have anymore. With modern medicine and technological advances, the infant mortality rate, fortunately, is extremely low nowadays. But in the medieval times, if 50% of people are dying before they hit 1 year old, obviously the average life expectancy is going to be lower overall. Our third misconception that I personally remember hearing vividly as a child was that if you drop a penny off the Empire State Building and it lands on someone, it will kill them. This is completely false. Without getting too much into detail, let's just go over some simple numbers. For starters, a penny itself only weighs 2.5 grams. With the height that the penny would fall from the Empire State Building, it would have the opportunity to achieve terminal velocity. However, adjusting for wind resistance and air friction would only allow this to really reach anywhere from 30 to 100 miles per hour. Which you might be thinking, 100 miles per hour? Damn, that's gonna kill me. Well, no, because you have to think about the energy expenditure once it impacts. It takes roughly 68 joules of power to be able to fracture a human skull. That means anything with a force higher than 68 joules has a high probability of killing you if it impacts with your skull. Now, for context, a raindrop with its tiny mass at terminal velocity will only have 0.002 joules of kinetic energy, and a penny at terminal velocity will only have about 0.2 joules. So, although you may have heard, and it may seem that a metal object at terminal velocity could easily kill you, that's simply not the case, at least with a penny. So the next time you're up in a high building, throw all the change you can over the edge. It's completely safe, it's fun, and nobody will get mad at you. And if someone does get mad, just do what that really annoying kid in school would do. Just say, "It's a free country. It's a free country. I can do what I want. It's a free country." Nobody thinks that's annoying. It's honestly great. Number 4. Benjamin Franklin did not invent or discover electricity. At some point, you probably heard the story of Benjamin Franklin tying a key to a kite and going out in a thunderstorm. Now, this story alone is already debated on when or if it ever even happened, but that's not what I'm focusing on. My focus is on the claim that Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. Right off the bat, one thing to make very clear is that nobody invented electricity. It seems pretty obvious, but just to clear the air, electricity is a natural force that exists in this world. Therefore, it is not invented, it is simply discovered. A bit of a nitpick, but worth mentioning. Now, to give credit where credit is due, Benjamin Franklin had one of the greatest scientific minds of his time. He was interested in many areas of science, made many discoveries, and even invented many things, including bifocal glasses. But he was not the first to discover electricity. Egyptian scholars wrote in text in 2750 BC referring to electric fish, known as the thunders of the Nile, and several Mediterranean cultures were aware of static electricity. The first proper electric study was conducted in the 1600s by English scientist William Gilbert, who actually coined the term electricity. Benjamin Franklin had numerous contributions in the field of electricity, notably demonstrating the electric nature of lightning with his key experiment, but he was not the first to discover it. This next one honestly blows my mind. People still believe that WWE is fake when it's obviously real. Like, just look at John Cena. He's real. He's as real as it gets. What do you think he's been doing for the last 20 years? Just faking it? Just doing nothing? Why do you think Fred would have John Cena in his movie if he was just a big phony? This is just complete lunacy. And even though it's modern history, it's still history and it's still real. Okay. Have you seen this painting? This is American Gothic by Grant Wood. And if you look at it, what do you see? A man, a woman, a pitchfork, a house, a barn. Now, if you're like most people, you probably assumed, oh, this is a husband and wife. Well, actually, no. This is a daughter and father. So now you just look creepy. Completely off topic, but just kind of interesting was how this painting even came to be in the first place. The only reason this painting exists is because Grant Wood, the original painter of the painting, saw this house that he was so inspired by that he said, I want to paint the people that probably would have lived here. And the people that modeled for the painting aren't even related. The woman in the painting is Grant's sister, and the man is their family dentist, which is so funny, but kind of interesting. Okay, so this next one makes a lot of sense, but I've just never thought about it. Ancient Greek and Roman sculptures were actually originally painted with color. They only appear white today because the original pigments have just deteriorated. There are some well-preserved statues that still have traces of their original color, but it is extremely rare. Think about it. Your 2006 Honda Civic has paint falling off. You think the pigments of 2,000 years ago are going to last forever? No. Speaking of things you can't see anymore, Helen Keller was famous for being a great speaker because of her limitations, right? If you do some research on her, or maybe if you just have some peripheral knowledge, that's probably what you understand. But actually, Helen was a great proponent of socialism and communism. She spoke mostly on workers' and women's rights, and she advocated for an American communist government. I just find this misconception quite interesting because a lot of information about Helen Keller has nothing to do with this, but this is the primary reason why she gained public popularity. Obviously, her story is motivational, and she was very well spoken for someone in her situation, but the majority of her initial content was all about communism, which is just so interesting that that's not talked about. Whether you support or don't support communism, I feel like this is just interesting that this fact is just left out. And she's just seen as, oh yeah, she was a great motivational speaker. Well, what did you talk about? And ladies and gentlemen, the last thing that I want to talk about is not communism. It is our last historical misconception. This misconception is that chastity belts were a medieval thing. Chastity belts were not a medieval thing at all. They didn't even exist back then. Also, a lot of medieval chastity belts that have been found are either complete fakes or anti-masturbation devices from the 19th to 20th century, when there was a widespread belief that masturbation could lead to insanity. In 1878, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, the creator of cornflakes, he was an advocate for complete abstinence of all kinds. There is literally a quote from John Kellogg that goes as follows: "Neither the plague, nor war, nor smallpox, nor similar diseases have produced results so disastrous to humanity as the habit of masturbation." All I'm saying is I think Johnny Boy should stick to cereal.